I were sharing my screen, shouldn't I be able to?
Well, you'll have that PowerPoint open. So you just need to go to your Outlook, and then there's like a list of programs, and one of them is PowerPoint.
In Outlook?
Yeah. Well, actually, that, you know, when you signed into portal.office.com on that screen. So it's the one right before you go to Outlook.
Oh, okay. On 365?
Yes,
Well, I
exactly.
don't usually use that. Can you just pull it up on the agenda?
You mean like in the packet?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
And we'll just do it that way.
That will work. The viewers at home, I mean, like, the commissioners won't see it, but people at home and on TV will see it. But also, everybody in the commission has the packet.
If I pull it up here and share my screen,
It will work.
Good deal.
So yeah, maybe you could give me the mouse when you're doing that. When we're doing that, Dustin.
oh, so you can scroll
Yeah.
when you want to.
They're gonna click on view links.
Oh, Dave, hey, turn your mic towards you, would you? The
The
microphone on your table. No wonder you sound so weird. Okay, that's gonna be better.
Carol, can you hear us? I'll take that as a no.
I don't think
It's a-
so.
I think
Because we don't have the audio on yet.
I just have the PDF, not the
Um,
PowerPoint.
oh, just in the bottom right, where it says like a microphone or the speaker or whatever, turn that up.
Turn it up.
Yep. And see if anybody can hear you. Okay. And then once you go back to your Zoom screen, hopefully there's a volume button on it, or start audio, or whatever. Oh, jeez. Okay. This is super important. Okay, on the bottom, oh shit. On the start menu, Dustin, there's a thing that say New Tech NDI Tools.
The
Under the letter N, yeah, NDI Tools.
Yeah.
Okay, hit the button that says Scan Converter. Okay, excellent.
I love production work.
Is the
Live-
audio on yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, Dustin, on that black box near you, is there a mute button on it? And for some reason, I'm still not seeing your screen, which is not good. Okay.
Can you try it again?
Test, test. Anybody hear me?
Oh, now that you're muted, maybe they can't.
Oh, great.
I should be able to hear this.
Yeah, that should be.
Oh, believe it or not, Dustin, on the screen, I can see a mute button on your feed. So somehow it thinks you're muted.
Well, he just muted it.
Okay.
So he needs to be unmuted. What do we need to have muted and unmuted?
Only that black box in front of Dustin on his table.
Okay.
I'm here.
And that black box is linked to,
YouTube, cable, and
like, which participant is that? Is that,
it's everybody.
that's everybody?
It's everybody. And then Dustin has the master to mute it if he chooses to.
Okay. So how did they hear us?
So how do they hear us?
As soon as he unmutes, everyone will be able to hear. We just have to get the volume set on that so you guys can hear it and it doesn't feedback.
Okay. So we need to try to lower the volume on,
The black
That.
box in front of Dustin.
And then
Okay.
Dustin is in control of the mute for his.
and I can turn off this microphone in front of me, or?
Yes, you can. I can hear you just fine. And Dustin, if you can adjust that camera, it kind of looks like shit.
Do I need to move? Well, so I can talk into the microphone from here.
Of course, yeah,
Okay.
you sound great.
Okay. All right. So let's try it again.
Okay?
Yeah, shoot.
I just heard something.
That's Steve
Okay.
was talking.
So yeah, Dustin, give it a shot and unmute that thing.
It is. It's hot.
I see on my screen that you're actually muted.
You have to unmute in Zoom. So like that's what he's saying is unmute you.
Yeah.
But then there's the feedback. Okay.
Test, test.
Oh, I need to turn here.
I was about to say, it sounds like your speaker.
Yeah.
It does.
Now we're good.
Now is it working?
Testing. Test, test. Steve, can you hear me?
I can.
Hey.
I can.
Thank you. Good.
Holy moly.
All right. So, are we good?
Oh yeah, we're on TV and
Kurt?
people are tuned in.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So we'll start by taking roll. This is the July 6th Multi-modal Transportation Commission meeting, and we're going to start with our study session here at 5, and then the regular agenda at 6. And I think Allie's got the roll call.
All right, just going down the list here. Just say present here. Nick Kuzmyak. Saw that he was on the call.
You did a hand raise,
Okay.
if that counts.
Yes, that's fine. John Ziegelmeyer.
Here.
Aaron Patton.
Erin is saying that she can't hear us.
Oh,
She wrote it in the comments, but she's here.
It looks like her microphone is muted on the screen.
Right, but she can't hear us. That would just make us not hear her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you might need to turn audio on.
Cut up the cheese into little cubes.
Okay.
Lettuce and meat. Oh, bye.
Lauren Freeman.
Here.
Catherine Schartz.
Oh, I'm connected to Elijah's audio.
Charlie Bryan.
I'm here.
Donna Hultine,
Here.
Steve Evans,
Here,
and Carol Bowen.
Here.
Okay.
All right. So Aaron, Commissioner Payton, can you hear us? She still can't. I don't know if she can hear us.
She looks frozen.
She cannot hear us. Maybe we can have her call in. Hey, Kurt,
Yes,
is there a way that she can call in?
sure, with the telephone, sure. Or she can just try and reconnect and Dustin can just let her back in the meeting. So you can kind of like hang up and come back, so to speak.
I just got a message from Aaron saying that we should go ahead. So I don't know if you meant to send that to the whole group or not.
Well, we can provide the phone number for her to call in.
Sounds like it's kind of intermittent at this point, so yeah,
Okay.
we'll see.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and then if she, we can in the chat send her the phone number if she can continue not to hear us, so that she can call in.
Yeah.
And we'll go ahead and get started. And yeah, we do have a new commissioner. Lauren Freeman is our new commissioner, so she is fills our one vacancy, and so we're glad to have her here. And so welcome, Lauren, and we'll go ahead here and get started. We're going to start by discussing our street design standards. And Dustin, are you able to walk through the slides? Or if you could give me the mouse, I can do it. Thank you. All right, can you guys see the screen? All right. I know this was one of the topics that some were interested in, and so I put together a few slides, just very high level design standards that we have here for the city of Lawrence and that we follow. And really, I would just say, please interject as we go along the way with any questions that you have. And my presentation is going to be pretty short, but just here to take questions and listen and get any thoughts that you guys have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Our Municipal Services and Operations Department has a technical resource page online here, which I have the link to, which contains our plan preparation and design criteria manual. It also has our city's standard details and our city construction specifications. So these resources are what we use to design and put plans together for public improvement plans in the city. We do review all three of these sections annually and look for areas that we can improve or clarify, and materials specs change from year to year, and so we look annually to make improvements. and we also get feedback from our local stakeholders and our engineering consultants and development community on any changes that we make on an annual basis. In our transportation section of our design criteria, we have a list of design references, a lot of them more of the technical nature, that are used for designers that are putting together public improvement plans for transportation projects. One of the big ones for technical design is the ADJOURNMENT Green Book, and ADJOURNMENT is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. That document's been around for a long time and gets updated, about every 10 years or so. I think we've talked about the MUTCD before, but that's geared towards traffic control devices and signage and pavement markings. Here in the last decade or so, NACTO, and I think North American City Transportation Officials, I think is what that acronym stands for, has published some design guides for urban street and bikeway and transit design that we've referenced from time to time. A lot of the information in there is more of conceptual nature and not into the technical design details, but there's good guidance in there. Also, ADJOURNMENT has a guide for bike facilities. ABBP has bike parking guideline. There's a roadside design guide that deals with roadside safety that we look at. Highway capacity manual looks at mainly intersection improvements and warrants for turn lanes and volume for through lanes. KDOT has some guidance for development of design projects that are on the state highway system. KDOT also published a Kansas Roundabout Guide, which is a real good resource that we've used when we've been designing roundabouts in the community. ProWag is our guidance for ADA accessibility. That's for everything in the public right-of-way, and I can kind of talk about that a little bit here in a second. We also have our stormwater management criteria, which is incorporated into street design, and recently have adopted this bikeway design guide, which is a part of our recently updated bikeway plan. And that bikeway design guide has different criteria on different design concepts based off of speed and volume of different streets. So that's a kind of a new resource that we have. A little bit about street classification, which is kind of the, I guess, the beginning of design, is looking at what the classification of street is. The arterial and collector streets in Lawrence are established by our major thoroughfares map, and that's part of our transportation plan that's also in the city's comprehensive plan. We have a link here that will, it's to our interactive GIS that will, well, I don't know why that says it cannot be found. Can you try to? Oh, I need to sign in. Oh. All right. Well, let me get back out of this. So, our major thoroughfare map is online on the public GIS webpage. So it is out there for reference, and that identifies the arterial streets, minor arterials, collectors, and then all other streets are residential or local street classifications. A little bit about some of our standard street widths. You know, we've talked a lot with the East 19th project about collector streets and widths, so I've included some of that information here for collectors and residentials. Our city standard for a collector street is 31 foot and 36 feet with on-street bike lanes, and that's shown on one of our standard details. City residential streets are 27 feet, and that's back to back. Our overall, our city street standards kind of set the expectation for public and private design and construction in the community. And these standards, again, are maintained by the city engineer and reviewed annually. I did some research last fall when we were just talking about East 19th Street and collector streets to look at what other street widths other local and peer communities had for collector streets. So this is just for information only. It went through, and different cities have different ranges just with collector streets as they do with residential streets as well, as far as street widths go. I would say in reference to the city's street width standards, those are just minimum widths. There are you know, some instances where they could be a little wider with parking or with turn lanes at intersections or with bus turnouts, but just as far as minimum guidelines go, here's some other minimum width from other area communities. With our bikeway plan, we are now.
David?
Yes, Carol?
I had a question on the previous slide. Yes. Are those the widths going forward, or historically are those the widths? I mean, if we looked at a street that was 10 years ago, would they be this wide?
Commissioner Bone, I don't know for each community. These were what their current minimum standards were when I did that research at the end of last year. So for any community, or for even Lawrence, standards have changed over time, and classifications have changed even after streets have been built, and so they may not all be similar, especially over 10 years things may have changed, but at least in reference to Lawrence's collector street standards for as long as I've been around, since 2007, they've been 31 foot and 36 for a collector street and 27 foot for a residential. So at least for Lawrence, they've been that way for any new street that's been reconstructed. Did you have any?
Dave, quick question. Do you have any idea of, sorry, Nick Kuzmyak, Chair, MMTC. Do you have any idea what Kansas City, either on the Kansas or Missouri side, has for minimum street? I guess, are they even still subject to having to designate streets as collector arterial? I would assume they are, because they get grants, right? But I'm just curious if you have any insight into their street widths.
Well, in the KC metro area, a lot of, every community may have different standards. So you got like Olathe next to Overland Park, and you'll have KC-MO, KCK, or Wyandotte County Unified Government, and Leawood, and then all of the other cities, Grandview, Lee Summit. They may all have different street width standards. So I don't know. I mean, these are just some of the ones that off the top of my head I just looked up because we kind of referenced some of these communities, and
yeah.
But yeah, they could be they could vary a little. Some of the communities in the KC metro area follow APWA. They have an AP, which is the Public Works Association. They have a Kansas City metro chapter that they try to standardize a lot of the technical design of roads and curvatures and things like that, but as far as street widths, that may vary from community to community.
Yeah, I understand. I guess I was specifically asking, I guess, either Kansas City, Missouri or Kansas City, Kansas, those particular municipalities. I'm looking on their site right now, and I realized there may be some difference in how different municipalities define this minimum width. I know for us, it's what, curb, like back of curb to back of curb, is that correct?
That's correct.
So here, it says minimum right-of-way, which is not super useful because that could include a utility easement, right? And it says, the minimum width of traffic lanes, which is fine, but that's just a lane, which is just a component of a street. So it doesn't appear easy to find, but I guess where I'm getting with, now that I'm seeing the difference in these standards, is it seems like the peer cities that you've brought up seem to have a discrete number, or at least a range of numbers for these minimum street widths, whereas Kansas City doesn't have that number. They define it in a completely different way, it seems, or at least that's how it is on a cursory glance here. So I guess is it like ADJO or NACTO that defines how you must say, like, all right, minimum width goes curb to curb on this kind of street? Is that an ADJO thing, or is that up to each city to define?
It's up to each city to define, Commissioner. There's not a standard street width in NACTO or ADJO.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions on this slide or the next one? Or I guess or the previous one? Let me see if I can go down here. All right, yeah. So our bikeway plan, again, is we are reconstructing streets and looking at appropriate bike facilities. We're now looking at the level of comfort of bike facilities based off of speed and volume to determine when we are doing the design what the appropriate bike facility should be versus the way we previously did that, which was just going off of the plan, and as volumes and speeds may change, may be appropriate to make changes, when the design's done, and not go off of a plan that may be older. And so there's a link here if there's any other questions on our bikeway plan, but I think most of you are probably familiar with it. Some other references that are incorporated into design in the city code. I've referenced here in our subdivision regulations. In Article 8, we have some subdivision design standards, and these are really to help guide development, particularly when we're building new subdivisions and establishing right-of-way widths on plats and appropriate locations of access. And we use the classification of the streets and the major thoroughfare plan to kind of as a starting point to delineate, as the community grows and extends its street network, what are the appropriate streets to build to serve development with arterial and collector streets, and then local streets to connect to collector streets. So there's some guidance there in our subdivision regulations that help guide development for design. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Which of these came first, the subdivision design standards or the street design standards? Or are they just kind of pegged to be like mirrors of each other in terms of right-of-way width and such?
Well, we've had street design standards around for a while, and the subdivision regulations, so I think they've both kind of evolved over time. Our city street design standards, when I started, the last published edition was from 1989, and we updated it in 2016 and made it a lot, added some more detail, more of the technical nature to help provide guidance to designers and construction of streets and details that needed to be on plans. So I don't know. I think we've had guides around for a while. They've evolved over time. So I don't know if there was any or what major changes in the subdivision regulations, the last major overhaul, which I think was in the mid 2000s. What changed when that occurred? So I don't know if I have any good history or on details of that. Most of the guidance in there has been pretty standard for a while.
Okay. It basically just sounds like in that case they've aligned for quite some time, and yeah, that seems to keep things consistent.
Yeah, and I would say, in infill areas when we're going through subdivision process, there are obviously areas where we look to approve variances for right-of-way width. For instance, West 23rd Street is predominantly 100-foot right-of-way. Our subdivision regulations for arterial streets 150 feet. So it's, in areas where, infill type areas where it's not practical to have really wide right-of-way, we review the standards, but also, look at providing variances where it's just not reasonable to meet newer standards. So, and that's kind of the same way for access to, there's areas where, when we're doing design, we preferably don't have direct access to arterial streets. We have collector streets that connect to arterials and then locals to collectors, but there's, there's infill development that occurs that there's no other reasonable access but to directly to arterial streets. And so these are design standards that are kind of guidance for probably more new design or new development, but there are instances where we have to use judgment and grant variances where it creates hardships.
Variances on the subdivision design standards?
Yes, particularly with a right-of-way width and access.
Does that fall under Planning Commission? Or is that like under the MSO?
Yeah, the right-of-way, right-of-way, vacation and dedication of rights-of-way go through the Planning Commission and then to the City Commission. There are some things with access that go to the Planning Commission, and then appeals to Planning Commission decisions go to the
Board of Zoning Appeals?
Board of Zoning Appeals, thanks.
No problem.
So it probably just depends on what, what it is, I guess, but predominantly it's through the Planning Commission and City Commission. The subdivision design standards don't have anything on street width. It's more right-of-way width. And there's not a lot of technical design information in the subdivision regulations.
Okay. And one more question. Which department develops these? Is it MSO or MPO?
The subdivision regulations is through our planning development department.
Okay. Thanks.
Also in our subdivision regulations, we have some standards on public improvements, and that basically just pretty general that these will comply with, public improvements shall comply with the construction standards established by the city engineer. There is some detail in this section on providing sidewalks and pedestrian ways, and street trees, and also kind of speaks to right-of-way dedication and vacation, which are approved by the City Commission. That's all that I had here on the list. I think the other thing in our Chapter 20, Article 9 that we recently talked about was loading and access, that chapter. So we did, we looked at, in consultation with our planning department, making some changes to that, which includes, a lot of it was parking standards outside the city right of way, but also included some standards and design standards on access location. And so that too is something that we reference with street design. But other than that, I didn't have anything else. I'm happy to pull up any information that you guys want to see, or street typical sections or standard details, or really just open it up to the group, get your thoughts on or any questions you have.
Thanks, Dave. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. So this one's a little bit more open-ended than our previous study sessions have been, and that's by design. When I was working at the possible agenda with Dave, we kind of realized that, I think there was some discussion back during the East 19th Street design discussions on how design standards maybe can mesh with infill development, or just projects that are in older neighborhoods where the design hasn't been updated in many, many, many years, and design standards has, since basically eclipsed what is now there. And I think there were a couple people on the commission who were interested in kind of probing deeper into these design standards and see kind of how we got to where we got and what it means for us going forward. So it was originally going to be an agenda item, but I thought it might make sense to try to get a little bit more open-ended discussion among us. And thank you, Dave, for having kind of a nice high-level overview of what they are, what they mean, where you got them from, how long they've been around. That really helps, I think. So let's see. With that, I think I'm going to let other people start, because I do have a couple questions and comments, but I'd kind of like to see where other people are headed first. So since I don't know what order we're in, it's kind of hard without being at a table. Carol, you're first, I guess. I see that hand raised.
Is the only policy we have the complete streets policy?
The only design policy, as far as I know, yes.
Quick question before we go forward, by the way. I don't think I heard at the beginning any kind of, and I may have just had on the audio system, but do we still have to announce our name at the beginning of talking, or have we moved past that?
Yes, we should do that. Please.
All right.
Yeah, please.
I'll keep doing it.
Thanks for the reminder. Can
You guys are going to be hearing my name and title in your sleep.
sharing?
All right.
Thank you.
Nick Kuzmyak signing off. Who wants to raise their hand next? Steve.
Okay, we'll let Lauren go next and introduce herself at the same time. I think Carol and I have talked about this over the years. I'm kind of a process person, and rather than, I think it's really good to have a high level view of this stuff, but when we get into evaluating projects and making comments, the earlier that we can get in, the better. And I understand in the design world, you've got to start somewhere. So I totally understand where staff is when they begin a project. But for us, perhaps it's conceptual design or early schematic design or something to get better acquainted with the process and what standards and codes have been applied for the early thinking of an East 19th Street, a Louisiana Street, a 23rd Street project. I think that would make us, I think, a little better equipped to participate and provide meaningful input, and it's probably most important. And I also think that would be good for the public too, to kind of see where something evolves. And when we put together the complete streets policy, I think that was something we had in mind, that we'd be looking at that policy and those checklists along the journey of a project from conceptual through construction. And when I see, you know, the view that Dave just gave us, that's my thinking. It's like, okay, not to be facetious, but so what? You know, how does this enter into our process and our thinking as we go through these projects in the future? So that was kind of a high level deal too, but I think this is really valuable. I'm done for now.
All right. Well, Lauren, you can either introduce yourself now if you plan on doing a lot of discussing, or if you want to wait till the main meeting, that's also okay. It's up to you.
I can introduce now. Lauren Freeman. I am from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, moving to Lawrence to start my MPA at KU. A little bit of background on me. I attended the University of Iowa for my undergrad. And then I've worked for the city of Cedar Rapids for 2 years in community development. So I've gotten a little bit of a taste for some of the stuff you guys are talking about, but also have a lot to learn. So please correct me if I am totally out of line or don't know what I'm talking about, but excited to learn. So one of the things I was thinking through actually at the city I work at is we did a right-of-way manual and design guide, and I wasn't a part of it, so I'm not very knowledgeable, but I'm curious if the street design that you're talking about, if that includes the full right-of-way, and whether that would look at like street furniture or like other kind of more aesthetic pieces and how that fits into different neighborhoods, kind of fitting the aesthetic of different neighborhoods, and if that's kind of part of this discussion as well.
That's a good question. You know, we don't have design standards on things like street furniture. I think with our complete streets policy, that might be one of the things that is on our checklist. But you know, there's so many factors that go into design other than just the technical details, that when we look at I guess context sensitive design in neighborhoods, that in the past we have looked at things like that with the East 9th Street project that we did east of downtown. We looked at different design options to include art and integrated art into design. That's not really a standard design practice, but something just in particular to that project that was that we looked at. But it, you know, for the most part, it does include everything within the right-of-way, not just the street width. So it includes reviewing where the water line is going to go, where utilities are going to be, where transit facilities and bus stops would be located, where storm sewer is located, bike ped facilities, really everything within the right-of-way. So there is not one-size-fits-all design standard, especially for infill reconstruction projects, which are challenged by limited right-of-way and utilities. But yeah, we don't, I guess, have a right-of-way type guide here in Lawrence, but those are all things that we do look at with design, all those different facilities. And I think our complete streets policy tries to attempt to make sure we document that as well. that we're documenting transit facility, that we've reviewed if a street's on a bus route, that we've documented that to see if it's important to include transit facilities or other amenities. So.
Does anybody else have thoughts? If not, I may start. So, once again, Nick Kuzmyak, Chair, MMTC. I did have a couple questions, and I'd like to start off with kind of just a, I guess, more technical / history one, and that would be, what in general determines the minimum street width? I know for things like highways, it's issues like runoff area for safety for cars that lose control. Something like GM found in the 1960s that 30 feet was pretty good to stop a car if it went off the road. That's not necessarily the same when you're not traveling at highway speed, so I assume there is some safety involved. It seems to me that things like fire truck access are a huge driver of how wide streets must be and how wide turn radiuses must be as well. So I guess I wonder kind of what are the main factors? Is there just one? Are there many? Because they seem pretty similar throughout the cities that you showed us.
Yeah, Commissioner, I would say that while it's not explicitly in our design criteria, the minimum fire access is something that is probably the basis of our minimum street design, at least for residential streets. We look at needing 26 feet adjacent to fire hydrants, and our residential street standard is 26 feet inside of the curbs, 27 foot on the back of the curbs. But other factors would just be availability of on-street parking. So, having minimum lane widths is one part of determining the street width, but also are we going to provide on-street parking on one or both sides of the street? Those can contribute to the overall street width, although it's not the additional driving lanes or the driving lane width. So those are things that are considered with street width for parking.
Okay. Okay. So I guess my comment on that would be that a lot of our streets in older cities and even older parts of Lawrence are significantly skinnier than the ones that the street design standards prescribe. And I mean, I guess fire trucks have gotten larger over the years, but it's not like large swaths of the city burned down in the past necessarily. So it seems to me that maybe a lot of this is that maybe ADJO's has gotten more and more conservative over the years, trying to limit any liability from standards that they publish. I would assume there's probably some of that. But I think as people are starting to realize, the kind of benefits that older parts of the cities can bring in terms of denser development, more walkable streets, slower streets, I think there's probably more focus on kind of calming streets. I mean, that was the whole point of the bicycle boulevards, was to calm streets enough that people would feel comfortable getting on their bike and riding on the street, even if they weren't a trained cyclist. So I think as we go forward, it seems to me that trying to think of how we could keep minimum safety standards, but also be sensitive to the fact that a street is not just for cars, it is also for other users. I don't know. I don't know if we're really going to make any traction in the coming years of trying to reduce these minimum widths, but they're going to start coming into conflict if we're talking like the kind of stuff that Plan 2040 talks about, for example, with having really good walkable neighborhoods, with, kids being able to play near the streets and traffic speeds being 20 miles an hour. It's going to be pretty hard to do this with very wide streets, especially if people don't even park on them, because they all are also required to have garages and driveways by a different city code. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of where I'm stuck on, is that it seems that we're still in the suburban mindset that everything has to be huge and that everything new has to be built for the biggest possible fire engine that could ever go through there, hook and ladder and pumper, despite the fact that it's just two-story homes. And I don't know, as an engineer who works with a lot of really conservative engineers, I can totally see how that could happen. I know some people who over-design you know, like crazy. So I can see how that would happen. But I mean, I don't know, at some point it just seems to me that there's got to be some sort of context sensitivity. And I think we saw that in the East 19th Street redesign, where the neighborhood kept saying, or I guess adjacent neighborhoods, basically kept saying, it's 22 feet wide now, works fine to me, you know, not a problem. And there really was just no having that. So I don't know. I think ignoring both precedent and context can make it seem to neighborhoods like we're trying to shove projects into them that maybe don't fit. So, but I don't know what the rest of the commissioners think about that, or, you know, if that's way out of left field here.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. I looked briefly at the specifications, which were all very technical, and all I saw was criteria specifications for new construction. And then I thought, well, what policies do we have that we use as an umbrella for this? And the only one I could think of was the complete streets policy that Steve and his committee worked on way back. Retrofitting, I'm just not comfortable applying new standards to old neighborhoods. I just don't think it works, and I think we need to think through a policy. We can't throw David to the wind, but we need to have a policy that will help guide us to different situations that are not new construction.
Well, this is Steve Evans, Commissioner. I think, Carol, maybe that's our job. A policy, I'm trying to visualize what that policy would embrace and how it would be, you know, what it would accomplish. I do think that Michael Almond makes this point all the time, the difference between, and Dave did too, between a code and a standard or a guideline. And I think where it gets real slippery is when there's a code issue. And correct me if I'm wrong, but East 19th Street was primarily guidelines on street widths and amenities as much as a policy. So I really think that, you know, the interpretation of a standard is our job and the community's job to challenge and understand better why a standard should or should not be accepted under a certain circumstance.
Kuzmyak, Chair, MMTC. Steve, I can agree with you. That seems like that, I think at this exact point in time, is probably our role when it comes to dealing with street design standards, is that they're there as a really strong guy based on experience, based on references, but may not always fit. And because of that, that's where maybe we, by listening to the community affected by these projects, comes in to try to hear both sides and see if we can balance standards with, you know, the desires of those who will actually use the project. When you were talking about not really sure what that policy would look like, it took me a while to think about this, and I kind of had to reach to an analog in a different part of the city, and that was the idea of a planning code. So I don't have a degree in planning, but I do think it's kind of fascinating, and I've looked into a lot of stuff in that particular zone. And what I've realized is that, so for those of you who may not be familiar, Lawrence has both a normal use-based planning and development code, which is what most cities around the country have, but it also has a parallel code called the SMART code that is form-based and is context-sensitive. Technically, as a developer, you can use either. It's kind of wild. If you want to build something new, you can choose which planning code you want to go off of. The vast majority, everybody but one, basically, has chosen to use the regular use-based codes because that's what everybody else does. It's what the US has generally done for the past 30 or 40 years. It's standardized. But the form-based code is meant to do stuff like, say you wanted to put a corner store in my neighborhood. I'm in Pinckney. There's clearly some spots that used to have corner stores. They do not look like normal houses. Back before zoning, that was okay. But these days, if you use use-based zoning, you would have to ask for a variance to get a corner store, and that would be kind of an uphill process. Whereas if you try to use form-based zoning, you would ask questions like, does it fit into the fabric of the neighborhood? Is it context sensitive? Does it serve the needs of those around them? Does it kind of stick out like a sore thumb? And if it kind of passes muster, then you can do it, even if the use wouldn't necessarily be defined by that other use-based code. So it's kind of a different way to look at our zoning. Do we look at it for what uses you can have and kind of segregating everything by you work here, you live here, you shop here? Or do we think maybe you can work, live, and shop all in the same neighborhood as long as it looks sort of coherent? It's more aesthetic and traditional. So going off of that analog, I was thinking what we have with the city design standards right now is basically kind of a relatively rigid code. It's a use-based code. If you are using this for residential, thou shalt do this. If you're using it as an arterial, thou shalt do this instead. And there is some opportunity for sort of tweaking the details, but for the most part, it's pretty prescriptive. Now, I mean, a variance process like is occasionally undertaken with the subdivision standards could be a sort of compromise template for how to deal with stuff like this if there was some sort of variance. If, for example, you know, say B&G Consulting came back and did a project somewhere else entirely, I was like, man, this is not going to work on your design standards. What if we did this instead? Can we get a variance for this? I know we don't have the process right now because I asked about it back in October, but if the planning department has it, possibly MSO could have something like that as well, maybe model off of that. Moving one step further, going back to that form-based code that I mentioned, I wonder, is there any such thing as sort of a form-based street design manual? And Lauren, this is where your expertise may come in because you have more of a planning background for a very different cities. So I guess that question's for really anyone who has experience or thoughts on that. But I guess how could we change the standards to more accurately reflect how they could be used?
This is Lauren Freeman, Commissioner. Yeah, I'm happy to send the Cedar Rapids. I'm not sure it's actually completed yet, but they actually, they have some urban form districts, and they actually highlighted in their right-of-way specification design manual these certain neighborhoods, and basically met with the neighborhoods and figured out what is the aesthetic of this neighborhood and how do the streets reflect that. So they looked at, you know, the design of wayfinding signs and street furniture and how would bus shelters look like and what are the patterns of the bricks on the side. I think that's an important piece because our roads really reflect what our neighborhoods look like, and a more urban neighborhood has a different road than maybe a historic neighborhood. And so I think, Nick, that's a great point that it's more than just like what the width of the street is. I think this could be an important conversation for kind of making sure that our streets look like how our neighborhoods are.
Thanks. Dave, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this because, I mean, it's not like we've really talked about this beforehand, so this is kind of coming out of left field from me to you. So any initial thoughts on the idea of form as a context definer?
Well, I think it's, you know, when you're looking at larger corridors, if you're identifying larger corridors to apply a form to, it might be appropriate. That might have been a reason why it hasn't been used a lot in Lawrence, the form-based code that we had. I think it's only been used, I guess, this once on that 23rd Street project. But the challenge with that is that there's so many things in that design code that, you know, like on-street parking, unless you're changing the rest of 23rd Street to on-street parking, or you know, have a plan to have a more uniform design, it's you know, it's hard to apply that on an individual project basis or for a small area. So, but if you know, if there are corridors or neighborhood plans that dictate the need to change the standard or to incorporate you know, other things in design, you know, within the right-of-way, I think it's something that we could look at. We kind of tried to do that a little with that East 9th project in a way, where we had a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different ideas, you know, a lot, you know, for using the right of way, whether or not we're adding parking or bike facilities or separated facilities, and so didn't really come up with I don't know, a form on that project. We kind of fell back to our typical standard on that one, but so yeah, I think it's a good idea if it's applied to a longer stretch, you know, area or street than just an individual basis. But yeah,
I think I'd like to maybe kind of push back on that a little bit. I think when we're talking about forms, it sounds like when you would do a project on a large corridor, that would set the form for everything that comes after it. And I think that's kind of how the smart code is currently applied, which is odd. But I think in other places that have form-based zoning codes, for example, it's trying to fit a small project into a larger context that already exists. So you're trying to take the form that is there and match what you're putting into what's already been there for a while. So like, if there isn't any corrugated steel in the houses, you're not going to put any corrugated steel in your house. It's not going to happen. And I think that's maybe what I was getting at. And I don't think in that respect, our smart code is maybe a very good example, because like you're saying, it kind of has to be applied to large things at the same time. So I'd be interested in looking at both, Lauren, what you might send out, and Charlie mentioned in the messages that Pasadena's street design standards also take form into account. So I'm gonna look over those and kind of see what I can get from it. Maybe bring it back as a commission item for the next meeting and see maybe if we can continue this discussion. So I appreciate everybody keeping an open mind on this. I have unfortunately taken up a lot of our time. Does anybody else have any comments? I don't want to, shut anybody out here. All right. Well, in that case, yeah, if that sounds good with y'all, I'll kind of do some background research in my spare time to kind of see what we can make of this. So once again, Dave, thanks very much for presenting that. I've certainly learned something. With that, we're at 6 o'clock, so I don't think there was really anything else. Shall we take a break of some sort and then reconvene?
Yes, I'd recommend we take a 5-minute break, then we'll start our regular meeting. 6:05.
Okay. Sounds good. 6:05.
Thanks. Yeah, and then go over it.
All right, we're back.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Wait for Stephen.
Everybody's quite back yet, but I did want to note that I probably should have called for public comment during the study session. So I'm going to do that during the general public comment.
Is there a way if we phone number to get Erin Hayden to call in?
Yes, it's on the Zoom meeting link. There's a phone number for her to call in on the invitation.
You have this, that information I can send to Aaron? All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Kurt, you ready?
All set.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Dustin Smith, Senior Project Engineer at City of Lawrence Municipal Services and Operations. This meeting of the Multi-modal Transportation Commission is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and Public Access Channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu, next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed. Each time you speak, please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on during the meeting. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. With that, I'll turn the meeting over to the chair.
All right. Thank you, Dustin. This is Nick Kuzmyak, Chair of the Multimodal Transportation Commission. I will be abbreviating that as MMTC because otherwise we're going to go till 9 if I just keep saying my title. Let's go into B, approve the minutes. I'm going to start with approving last meeting's minutes from June 1st, 2020. I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to read them. Has anybody not and needs some more time? Or does anybody have any comment on them? All right, seeing no particular movement, I would entertain a motion to pass them.
This is Charlie Bryan, MMTC Commissioner. I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay.
Commissioner.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. First by Charlie to approve, second by Aaron. Let's see. Can we just do a show of hands at this point? Oh wait, because Catherine's only on audio, so let's do a roll call, I guess.
Yep.
Let me go down
Yeah,
our list real quick. Nick Kuzmyak, Chair. Aye. John?
Yes.
Donna?
Yes.
Steve? You may need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Thanks. Lauren?
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Charlie.
Aye.
All right, so that's 7-2. So looks like Carol's still out. Oh, sorry, and Catherine, which are you on, by the way? Is Catherine on the line?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that she's on. We were doing a roll call earlier, and she was not here
Okay.
for the study session.
Carol, now that you're back, would you like to say yay or nay to approving the minutes? You might unmute still. Carol, you're on mute.
Has it already been moved?
Yes, and seconded.
Okay.
We're at the end of the vote, so.
Yay.
Okay, thank you. All right, that passes. With that, we are moving on to section C, public comment. So I explained earlier, I don't know if anybody got a chance to hear, but I believe we have in the past solicited public comment during the study session. So since I'm totally dropped the ball on that one, would it be okay if if we were to allow both that topic and also the general rule of anything that's not on the agenda? Is there any, policy thing I need to worry about there?
Well, under public comment, we were only receiving public comment, but if the majority of the commission agrees to modify that agenda, and assuming it's just Michael, right, that wants to speak to it, I don't have any issue with that, making that change.
I guess in that case, quick question. Michael, do you want to speak to the study session?
This is Michael Allman, Sustainability Action Network. Not really. I just want to thank you for a very good discussion. I look forward to the next episode.
Okay, sounds good. In that case,
I'd like to make a general public comment.
I guess we got time. Quick show of hands. Is the rest of the commission okay with that? Raise your hand if you're cool with it. Okay, that's a majority. Michael, you got 3 minutes.
Okay, I just wanted to bring to the commission's attention an interesting discussion at the June 24 Planning Commission meeting. That was an agenda item about a replat and a rezoning on Harper Street. And if any of you are familiar with Harper Street, at approximately 17th, there's a dog leg there with pretty poor visibility, very crowded parking all along that street. And the proposal was to add 2 driveways right at the curve of this dog leg. Well, the Planning Commission, as Nick pointed out earlier, pretty much decides things based on land use, how it affects the use of the adjoining property owners, but very little to do with traffic and safety. Yet they had a good discussion about it, and it seems like their interest in that subject on how traffic safety impacts what they're doing could dovetail pretty well with what the Transportation Commission is interested in, and maybe some of the issues that come before either commission could be shared with the other commission for their particular viewpoint and input. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I actually have a comment on that for later, so thanks for the segue, but that will be for a future part of this meeting, so hold tight. With that, let's move on to the agenda items. So the first one is going to be consider recommending approval of the 2021 to 2025 5-year plan for non-motorized projects.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer with MSO. To begin with, last month, staff sought input for consideration in producing our annual 5-year plan. We discussed the impact the grant project had on that plan. We discussed moving the 13th Street Bike Boulevard to 2022, as well as moving our 21st Street sidewalk back to 2021. In the 5-year plan moving forward, there is $3,375,000 outlaid in the city's capital improvement plan. which equates to $675,000 per year. This also is going to mean that if you want to construct some larger projects, that's going to be contingent on underspending in a given year so that we can roll over funds into following years to achieve those larger budgets. The project list was rescored per the policy and took into account the changes that the commission approved in September of last year. Staff also added a cost per linear foot metric in the scoring sheet, which has been colorized into quartiles to better visually represent what those mean. And staff pulled projects from the lowest quartile where possible, meaning that we're trying to get the largest linear foot of project per dollar we're spending. The commission also asked for information regarding Parks and Rec's maintenance spending on the city's shared use paths. Speaking with them, current maintenance needs are outweighing the funding, and approximately $50,000 per year is spent on maintenance. This is going towards rehabilitation of concrete panels, addressing drainage issues as they arise, as well as they're beginning to address their aging infrastructure in the form of bridges on those trails. If the Multimodal Transportation Commission were to recommend funding for maintenance, staff would recommend that wouldn't begin until 2022. And that's because we kind of need a contingency next year for the 3 construction projects we've got going on. Next, per the non-motorized policy, the city has issued a yearly call for projects, and the results of which are included in the attachments to this agenda item. You'll find that there were 130 attendees to that Lawrence Listen surveys that contained 57 responses, equating to 2.9 hours of public comments. We had a pretty good response in that regard, I think. Of those responses, staff has identified 6 projects that would need to be reviewed for appropriateness and feasibility before we add them to our project lists. In summary, I just want to reiterate that the plan you see before you for approval would dedicate funding for our 2021 projects only, with outlying year projects not having any guarantee of funding, as the plan will have to adapt to changes such as the grant awards, like this version of the plan has done. And with that and the plan and documents in front of you, I'd be happy to field any questions you might have at this point.
Okay, thank you, Jake. This is Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Let us ask any sort of technical questions that we need to shore up our understanding of what is going on. And then from there, I'd like us to segue into any public comment, spoken public comment. And then after that, we can bring it back to the commission for further discussion and final recommendation. So with that, I want to open the virtual floor to any fellow commissioners who have any clarification questions that they would like to ask. Oh, Carol.
I have a question on grants. If we're awarded a grant, the city pays some and the state pays some. What if the state cuts back on the grant? Do we have to pick up the slack, or can we let the grant go? How do we handle such a thing?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. Carol, I don't foresee the state cutting back those matching contributions once they've been awarded, because that money has already been allocated to the state, to these programs. So we would know before we even applied for those grants what that percentage match is going to be.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I didn't see a cost per linear foot for bike projects. Did I miss it, or was it not done?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. Yes, Chair, that was not included. Again, we don't have detailed project estimates for most of those bike projects yet, so it wouldn't be a very valuable metric at this point.
I understand. Okay, thanks. Okay.
I got Nick.
Yeah, Steve.
Jake, if you can do it relatively quickly, on the pedestrian projects for 2021, there are 4 lines, and looks like there's, I guess, one project with several components, and then a couple of projects that are pretty clear. Could you just quickly show the map views for projects with the TA grant funding, just so we can get a better visual of where those things are? I know there's a lot of maps in here. I don't know if you can get to them quickly or not.
Yes, Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. I can share screens here momentarily and bring those up. So hopefully you're seeing my screen at this moment and seeing me zoom through here. Okay. Do I have a confirmation that we're seeing this screen here?
Yep.
Okay, great. So here's our first project, P070. And these first, a slew of projects, I think we've got 6 or 7 of them, including a crossing or part of the Safe Routes to School Phase 2 project that is currently under design and will be constructing next year with these funds. P071 Tennessee Street on the west side from 21st to 20th. Both sides of Bellhaven Drive from 27th Terrace north to 27th Street. East 21st Street from Miller Drive to East 21st Terrace. We have Harvard Road from Crestline to Iowa. And then we've got the west side of Wakarusa Drive from Stoneback down to approximately where the new crossing there that KDOT will be putting in. And here's our 19th Street crossing at Alabama. And so that concluded the Safe Routes to School Phase 2 project. So this is where we move into our West 21st Street project from Tennessee Street to Louisiana. This is something we had hoped originally to construct this year, but needed to bump to fund the design of some of our grant projects. So as you would see in the table of selected projects, when we rescored this project, it didn't get a very high score, but we had already indicated to you guys that we'd be moving it to this year, so that is why it remains in the plan. And if you're familiar with the area, you'll know that our bicycle boulevard is going through this area, and Lawrence High here is on the northwest corner of that intersection. And then these next slate of exhibits are the projects that make up the Naismith Drive Sidewalk project on the east side of Naismith. This is the project that we rewarded over $400,000 for a transit grant that matches at 90%. And unlike our typical KDOT projects that cover 80% of construction, this covers 90% of construction and design. So with this grant, we're really kind of getting a bang for our buck. And I can scroll through those, but essentially we're going from 19th Street, or pardon me, 23rd Street north to 19th Street. And in the last project, I envisioned one construction project centers. We've got 2 more. We've got Maple Lane from East 21st to Clare Road, and the connecting segment here, East 21st Terrace from south of 21st Street to Maple Lane. Sidewalk on Ridge Court from 26th to 27th. I should back up and say that these, from this project on down the list, are projects that staff selected from our prioritization score that we'd be recommending to you.
Hey, Jake, this is Steve Evans again. These are 2021 projects?
Yes, that is correct. Construction.
Okay.
Pardon me, Steve, I may have misspoke. Our grant projects are for 2021. Everything else is in outlying years. Naismith, okay. I believe.
I was
to.
primarily interested in the 2021 projects.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I definitely went on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Jake, I had a question about trying to clarify what was in some of these lists. Sorry, let me get the right page for you. On page, sorry, totally lost it. Okay, it's telling me this is page 8. It's one of the set of rankings of the pedestrian projects. In the funding source, a couple of these are indicated as 2019 CIP, and I feel like I saw CIP elsewhere. Is that the city's capital improvement plan, or is that just an interchangeable term with this plan?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. No, that is the city's capital improvement plan, meaning it's a project specific to that plan.
Okay, so it sounds like in that case, kind of a freebie in terms of bike ped funding, but it's listed here for completeness and clarity. So, okay, that's what I was hoping was the answer. Great. Page 6 of this attachment, how does it fit into the rest of the rankings? It's got the same title, but things are in a slightly different order. I don't quite understand how it fits into things.
Sure, Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. What I wanted to do is pull out all the projects we were selecting from the entire list and put them up on one sheet so you could see how they scored comparatively. Again, so I think I mentioned our West 21st Street P211 scores a 7 on the revised scoring. So you'll see that, the majority of our projects are scoring high on the list. Our transit grant project, when we rescored it, didn't score as high, and that West 21st Street wasn't as high as we originally had them scored.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And finally, when it comes to crosswalks, I think a couple of them are just kind of blank in the cost per linear foot, and a couple are 0. How would we compare apples to apples here? Is it even possible, or are crosswalks so different that you can't really say the cost per linear foot is in the same range as, say, a sidewalk?
Jake Baldwin, MSO. I think each one of them just needs to be looked at, and I think we've been identifying those crossings here recently and just simply haven't got the estimates put to them.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions before we go to public comment? Charlie?
Charlie Bryan, Commissioner. I just wanted to get clarification, Jake, when you answered the question that Nick had about the use of the term CIP in the tables. Nick responded saying that was kind of a freebie. And I just thought, in my understanding, bike ped funding is part of the CIP. So I don't know that I think the CDBG tag that's in some of those is better regarded as kind of other money that's free. Am I understanding that correctly? Like when it's tagged CIP, that's still money it's not really money that we didn't already have some role in determining, right?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. Commissioner Bryan, when I have CIP in the chart, it is to essentially say that this is a named project within the CIP that is being funded by a source other than our bike ped funds. So it is an identified project per our policy, but it's being funded outside of our allocated bike ped funds.
Okay.
And I think that's what the Chair Kuzmyak meant as being a freebie.
Okay. So anything that's in that column that refers to CIP, CR, or SRTS, CDBG, those are kind of all funding sources outside of the funding that we're addressing.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, in that case, I'd like to cue a public comment. Dave or Dustin or Allie, who do we have on tap here?
We had some correspondence, but we didn't have any.
Well, I think we had one person sign up for public comment, which is Michael Allman.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're ready for that, we can go ahead and give him 3 minutes.
Sounds good. Michael, take it away.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize for not having a camera on my computer. I assume you saw the letter that Sustainability Action sent, and there are basically 4 points that we'd like to discuss. The first one is the sidewalk on the east side of Naismith Drive that I pointed out to you once again that February 5th, 2018, you voted to remove that sidewalk from funding. Why, I don't know. Staff decided to pursue it anyway, came back with it, I think it was last October, waving this 90% grant in your face saying, we have to do this now. The discussion questioned, well, where is the bicycle facility going to go if we put the sidewalk in? That's going to preempt putting a bike track or an SUP on the east side of Naismith Drive. Mr. Cronin pointed out that it's too soon to decide what to do about bicycles until the whole street project gets rebuilt, which is going to be 2023-24. Well, that to me begs the question. I think it's too soon to be designing and specifying where the pedestrian facilities go before we do the whole street design in 2023-24, simply because we got grant money. I want to know if you told the staff to remove the sidewalk in 2018, why did they pursue grant money for it? That's inappropriate. I think this project should be designed for an SUP. Transit money, grant money can be used if you want to do an SUP. It's transit money. It's because they're putting in a bus shelter. So number 2, Iowa Street sidewalk on the east side. Back in 2010, I believe it was, that whole street was reconstructed with a center turn lane for safety. An excellent job. Sustainability Action wanted to have a 10-foot wide SUP on the west side to take students from KU up to like Community Mercantile, for example. There was no room, according to Chuck Souls, to put in a 10-foot side use path. He put in a 6-foot sidewalk. There's no horizontal space to do any more. And yet they didn't, they kept adding more and more turn lanes, extending the extent of the project south and west, but they couldn't do a bicycle. So I don't understand how they're going to get a sidewalk in now, and it's on the east side where the terrain is even worse. I think that money could be used much better elsewhere. 9th Street, that bicycle climbing lane that was indicated by a consultant about 12 years ago or so, is the only way to get a bicycle, a bikeway from current bike lanes on 9th Street up the hill to Iowa Street. The only way to do it is with a climbing lane. We don't need another sidewalk there. And finally, I want to share my screen with, if I can find it. I don't see it. I'm sorry, it's not there. The green pavement markings at every intersection. Green pavement markings, like on Massachusetts between 11th and 14th, are very clear alerting means for motorists who are approaching an intersection to know that bicycles could be approaching and to look for them. This identified some 150 locations in Lawrence where SUPs cross intersections or major commercial driveways. And we've budgeted it. We use the cost factor that MSO has provided for us, and it is currently part of the capital improvement plan, just as the Naismith project is part of the capital improvement plan right now. So I'd like to see you do an SUP in the capital improvement plan for Naismith and do green pavement markings in the capital improvement plan as well. That's it, and I do appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. So I assume there's not anybody else who has signed up to speak, right?
That's correct.
All right. In that case, let's bring it back up here. Before we jump in, I was hoping to give Dave a chance to to address Mr. Allman's concerns. So if you want, can you speak to a couple of those, please?
I'll let Jake respond to the Naismith project. Let's start with that one.
Sure, Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. We went through most of these arguments, I think, with the City Commission at the end of last year when we proposed submitting this application. We went through the geometric constraints on why a shared use path wouldn't fit with the current geometry on Naismith, but showed how a sidewalk could be worked in with that current geometry. In addition, we spoke how the Naismith reconstruction project coming in 2024 would be the time to add a bike facility and identify that. I can't speak to the project being removed from the list. I think that was before my time, possibly. However, again, this grant covers 90% of our construction and design to add this pedestrian facility on Naismith. That I think we have the absolute, intention of saving with that reconstruction when we add that proposed bike facility. I don't know, Dave, if you have anything to add to that discussion.
Not on Naismith. I can, speak to the Iowa sidewalk. So it's still on our list just because there's that gap. We're going to look at it more in detail the feasibility of it. I think even with the cost estimate that we have, it still may be more than that, if not infeasible to do. So we're going to, it was in, what was it, Jake, 2025, 2024, 25 is one of the out years. So it's still on the list, but we need to do more preliminary design or review of the feasibility of constructing that. So for now, we kept it in the CIP just because it was the #1 project on our pedestrian scoring. Isn't that correct, Jake? I don't have the list here. I think it was #1, the Iowa sidewalk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. The other one I was interested in hearing your response to was about the green pavement markings or bike lanes or SUPs cross streets. Any thoughts?
I think that could be something that we consider with crossing improvements to add to the list. Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks. Okay. Does anybody else on the commission have questions, comments, thoughts? Carol?
I guess I'm thinking we still need to straighten up some of our process. Waiting for the design is too late to have a discussion. And after a grant is too late for a discussion. So it seems to me that if we're going to write a grant proposal for a specific project, that we should know about that before it's written and submitted instead of after.
I think that is sort of what happens currently. Is that correct? That is our next agenda item. Basically, here are 3 projects that we have. Is the MMTC okay with staff writing a grant for them or a grant application for them? Or, Carol, were you hoping to see maybe a larger selection of projects that are in earlier stages to be able to select from a larger pool to then write applications off of? Looks like you're muted still.
Yes.
There you go.
Basically, because of comments like Michael's, it would be nice if we had a flow that we could follow on how it happened and why. Also, we end up discussing designs before we discuss why we're going to do the project in the first place. And I would rather we would reverse that procedure somehow.
Charlie?
Are we on, this is Commissioner Charlie Bryan. Are we on to commission discussion of the item?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just, on the, I guess it's page 22 is the document I'm looking at, where it shows the proposed 5-year plan. 2021, I'm assuming, is really not up for discussion, but so I'm not looking at that very much. But when I go to 2022 and I see the 13th Street Bike Boulevard and then the intersection improvement at 13th Street in Massachusetts, it looks like it's construction. And I guess I'm wondering, have we already done design work, and is this really what we want to spend, $300,000 on in 2022? And so part of that's a question to staff. Is this ready to go, or just it's queued up waiting for construction? And I'm worried about the reaction that the neighborhood has already had to the Bicycle Boulevard work. So I guess I'd like to just make sure we have some discussion about this, that we're really in agreement on moving forward on Bike Boulevard for 13th Street. That's all I have for now.
Jake or Dave, any response?
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. Steve Evans, Commissioner. I guess a couple of comments and a question. The Naismith Drive sidewalk from 19th to 23rd, I really have mixed thoughts about that. I can see the point of everybody's points being made, Michael and Carol, about that. However, I do have some personal experience walking from the University Place neighborhood to 23rd Street. And the sidewalk on the west side of Naismith is very uncomfortable. It's in very bad repair, and you're very close to traffic. There are several retaining walls that, I don't know what the width of that sidewalk is. In some areas, it's probably 3 feet. Maybe not quite that narrow, but my point is it's very uncomfortable. And short of repairing that sidewalk, which I assume would be part of the 2023, 2024 project. So my 2 cents would be, outside of the grant, just where do we want to spend our money? I'd probably say the west side would be better than the east side, because eventually it's going to need to be repaired. So that's one point. The other point is that's not likely to happen. And in the meantime, I hesitate to say this because I can go back to 2018 and hear the arguments we all had about not doing anything over there unless it's a shared use path. I think getting something, an improvement from 19th to 23rd, does make a lot of sense to me. And I think it would probably be used quite a bit by pedestrians and KU people and neighborhood people. So I'm hesitant but supportive of that 5-foot sidewalk. I've been through the area enough to know there's all kinds of driveways, all kinds of mature trees, all kinds of constraints in putting a shared use path. And I think there's some right-of-way and easement issues too. It's very, very complicated. It's not like we have an open field we can put a 10-foot shared use path in. it's probably doable, but for a lot of money and a lot of inconvenience and probably a lot of residential complaints about a project like that. So my 2 cents, or nickel in this case, I'd go for the sidewalk on the east side of Naismith. Something is needed as soon as possible in that area. I think this would be a question for Jake and Dave. I'm not quite sure what's driving, what the motivational factors are for sidewalk on the east side of Iowa. I mean, do we have, what's driving that? Have we done pedestrian counts or surveys or something that would indicate that would be used in lieu of or in addition to the sidewalk on the west side?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. Commissioner Evans, I don't know off the top of my head what the breakdown of the scoring is out of our non-motorized policy model, but I do know that, it gets weighted heavily for access to priority destinations and being on the arterial. The ADT is going to be probably as high as anywhere in the city, which is also going to jump that score up.
Okay. I think that's all my comments, Nick. You can pass the baton if you want to.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Anybody else? Charlie.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I'll respond to both Naismith and the Iowa Street pedestrian projects. I'm supportive of putting in the sidewalk on the east side of Naismith. I'm also very supportive of the Iowa Street sidewalk. If you've ever tried to walk along that street, it's kind of deceptive in how you would actually cross. So as you're walking along the east side, there's nothing that tells you the sidewalk's about to end. I think years ago when that bridge was expanded and there wasn't space or wasn't a plan to be able to put a sidewalk on both sides, that was unfortunate, and it feels like we have a chance to finally resolve that. It is the number one, according to the score, it's the number one thing on our list. So it feels like it's certainly justified. It's on a major arterial, so it's unfortunate that people were forced to cross at an uncontrolled intersection if they're traveling south on the east side of that street. That's just how it works out. So they have to go all the way back up to Harvard. People aren't likely to do that. They're likely to try to cross at a bad place to cross on a big highway.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Charlie, I do agree with you. That's a pretty gnarly street, and it's one of those where there's just very infrequent pedestrian crossings. And I mean, students are students, right? They're going to run across that street for sure. And a lot of them have night classes, and it's a downhill, it's a blind curve, it's pretty dangerous. And so that's why I kind of struggle with, yes, it is the highest ranked project. Yeah, it's a dangerous intersection, but there's an opportunity cost involved. And I want to first really thank staff for adding that $1 per linear foot normalization. I think it really helps put things into perspective, because it's one thing to score things based on their overall merit, but it's another thing entirely to see their sort of more, I guess, quantitative comparison to each other. I don't know if I'm really saying that right, but when you divide it into those quartiles, you very quickly see that the Iowa Street project is wildly expensive compared to some other ones that score similarly. And when I say similarly, I mean the Iowa Street project is an 11, and there's like 20 or 30 projects right after that that are all 10s. It's not like they're that different, really. I mean, that's less than a 10% difference in terms of how they scored. So it seems to me that if you have an 11 and a 10, and the 11 costs, what is it here, $250 per linear foot, possibly more than that. But then you have a whole bunch of 10s that are all under $100 per linear foot. Some are even under $60 per linear foot. It seems like if we want to do the most good around the city and get the most bang for your buck, this, dollar per foot normalization could really help us see what else we could be doing with these funds. It's kind of like the, with completing the Lawrence Loop, for example. You have from Michigan to Peterson or whatever that connection is, and then from the Burroughs Trail up to the Bircham Park. Like, those are long stretches and they're going to be expensive. But then you have the proposed bridge over Iowa Street at 33rd, I want to say. That's going to be wildly expensive, and it's going to be 100 feet, 200 feet at the most. It's kind of small beans in comparison to how much it completes. And I think that kind of thinking already has gone into some of the staff's decision as to how much to push that particular project, because we know it's going to be expensive and it's not going to accomplish nearly as much of visible progress as the other ones. So I think now that I see the cost comparison, it seems to me that, man, it sure would be nice to get 3 projects for the price of 1, even if that one, is a dangerous intersection. At least there's already a sidewalk on Iowa Street. That's a good start. It's not perfect, but it's something. Whereas in some of these streets, there really aren't even sidewalks yet. And a lot of them are in less wealthy parts of town, which I think kind of factors into it as well. Like, for example, 23rd Street at FF Street, that's like the far southeast edge, not exactly a wealthy enclave. And I think if we're going to start talking, equity and how people get around, that's a consideration that's starting to kind of pop into my head too. So I don't know. I guess at this point, question 1, is it too late to deprioritize these very expensive, perfect projects? And if so, would anybody be willing to do that, even though we've already pegged them as priorities? I guess that's a question for staff first. Is it too late to change course? And then for commissioners, if it is not too late, would we be willing to make that call?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. It's not too late to change course as far as setting out the CIP. I mean, you guys can make a recommendation for us to remove those high-cost projects from the 5-year CIP. Just because they're on this 5-year plan doesn't mean you're approving or recommending approving that they be constructed, because they are in the out years. So really, the 2021 are ones that are important for us to take forward to begin design and allocation of 21 funds. But as far as removing them from the list completely, I mean, that would be another discussion we would have. What do we do to, if we just say, hey, they should not be on the list, that would probably be a slight change to the policy or a note to the policy to do that. So far we've included everything that's even a possible project to score, and that's why they're on there. So it's and they were on there last year, and we had some of the same conversations or thoughts on Iowa, and I think the 9th Street project came up at the city commission meeting. And, the cost, I guess the cost benefit, that's why we added that last column here this year. So I don't think there's any harm in leaving them on the list. But if, on our overall list there that we have with every project, if you want to give us direction to not even include it on the 5-year CIP, we're open to that. But if you approve it, the CIP as we present it today, it doesn't obligate us to move forward with doing those projects. They would remain on the list for next year. They'd probably just get moved up a year. But
okay, thank you for the explanation, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. So I think in that case, it's almost maybe there's 2 recommendations here. The first one is the kind of the here and the now. We need to decide if we're okay with the 2021 projects going forward, because that needs to be decided as soon as possible. And then I'm seeing the other decision here is, do we want to bring this back at a future date to maybe reconfigure 2022 to 2025 now that we know what the cost per linear foot is? Is everybody okay with that kind of breakdown? I feel like people may break down upon different lines, yay and nay, based on those particular questions. And I think if we break it down, then we can maybe get a better handle on what we want. Carol?
Clarify which projects are online for 2021.
It looks like there will be quite a few Safe Routes to School projects, 4, I think, or 5. I don't know, this cell seems to have been cut off. So at least 4, possibly more. Plus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Plus the West 21st Street from Tennessee to Louisiana, both sides, and the Naismith Drive sidewalk. So 2 out of 3 of those line items are heavily funded under grants. This is for the pedestrian side, by the way. Then on the bike side, it is Lawrence Loop, Iowa to Michigan, which is, again, a TA grant funded. So almost everything that's being done is to take advantage of the grants that have already been awarded. So to me, really, the only thing that would even be possible to change, it sounds like, is P211, 21st Street from Tennessee to Louisiana sidewalks. Is that correct, Jake?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
It would be, it'd be easy to remove that project.
Okay. I don't have any problem with it being on there. So let's focus our immediate discussion then on 2021 stuff. So since it's a pretty simple decision to make at this point, do we want to keep it as is, or do we want to replace P211 with something else?
This is Commissioner Evans. Personally, I'm fine with the way 2021 is presented now. I don't think, I don't recall the detailed discussion, but this just didn't appear. We've had these discussions over the last several months, and I'm sure we had a pretty lively debate to get it to agree to what was on here now. So nonetheless, I'm perfectly fine with it.
Erin Payton, Commissioner. I wanted to weigh in on the Naismith Drive. I had a question for Michael, but I'll get to that. A 5-foot sidewalk, the way I envision it, first of all, I listened to what Steve said about driveways. There's actually only 2 driveways on the east side that I can count. There might be 3. It was unclear. There are only 2 to 3 driveways on the east side of Naismith from 19th to 23rd. So it's not a terrible option for an SUP. And when I think of watching students travel that route, especially with the new apartment complex that's going up there, I imagine that if I were a student and I biked and I didn't want to bike on the road, I would use that sidewalk. So I can imagine that a lot of students on bikes will end up using the sidewalk also, and it's only going to be 5 foot wide. So to me, that leaves one of 2 options. It is kind of a tough space for an SUP because there are some houses that are very close to that road. But if those are student rentals, it might not be particularly challenging, or there might not be a lot of pushback against that. So it'd be interesting to know. But Michael brought up a cycle track, and I just wanted to, he might have said this earlier, so I apologize, but my internet for a while was kind of in and out, so I kept hearing blah, 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 and not what was actually being said. So I'm sorry if you kind of described it, but what was the thought on a cycle track? I guess I'm a little unclear of what he had his thought on how that would pan out. Is the idea that 1 lane would be converted to bicycle infrastructure? Because I guess I'm thinking, if that's the case, if that's possible for the future, maybe the question is for Jake. And so that could be something considered later, but we could still build the 5-foot sidewalk now. I think that may be it's maybe fine the way it is. But I could also see that an SUP wouldn't be a terrible option for that location, because it is actually does not have that many conflicts compared to other roads that we have SUPs on. I don't know, Michael's still there. Jake has any
Is that a question for me, Erin?
Well, yes, or maybe some feedback from Jake as to whether we could also have a cycle track there. I mean, I think that is one of the biggest pedestrian bicyclist corridors in town, unless I'm wrong, but that's the way it seems. So I guess maybe both. how you envisioned a cycle track, if it would really be bad to go ahead and put the sidewalk in and then have a cycle track later, and if that's a possibility. So, Michael, the question for you is, how do you envision that cycle track? Jake, the question for you is, are both possible?
Well, the way I envision
Sidewalk
if I
and
may.
or cycle.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael Allman, Sustainability Action Network. Interesting proposal that you're contemplating there, Aaron. That if we put in a 5-foot sidewalk, if we do it and design it in a certain way and configuration, maybe in 2023-24 we could add 5 more feet width to it. But that's to be determined. I'm not sure how that would work. As far as the driveways, you said there were 3. You're right. And the closest house that I see is at 22nd. It's 21 or 22 feet from the curb. The right-of-way line is like around half of that, 10 or 11 feet from the curb. So there's physical space, but it's close. The main problem I see with the bicycle track, and this would apply to the sidewalk as well, at 20th Street, there are 2 mature trees. Granted, like Commissioner Evans pointed out. Other than that, the trees are small and not very particularly valuable trees. But those 2 trees at 20th Street would have to come down. Maybe one of them would have to come down for the sidewalk. I don't know. But we would have to purchase right-of-way, some for the sidewalk, and 5 feet more for a shared use path. Either way, we'd have to purchase right-of-way at 20th Street. So it seems like almost 6 and 1/2 dozen in the other, with some slight variation on how much right-of-way and whether it's 1 or 2 mature trees. I can't do the engineering study, but that's the way it looks to me. My concern is that when we get to 23, 24, where are we going to put a bicycle facility? It seems like it would have to be on the street. And Commissioner Bowley does not, I mean, a number of us no longer want to see most of our bicycle facilities on the street anymore. They need to be more physically separated one way or another. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Kind of. I mean, it was whether a lane could be converted to a cycle track, because if that really isn't feasible, then there goes my internet again. Then I really feel like we should be considering an SUP or look at what that might entail there, because I actually think it's a pretty good option. I mean, there are some conflicts, and the house I was looking at, there are about 3 houses that feel very close to the road just based on walking down that road, and I walked down it several times a couple of months ago. So there are about 3 houses there that just feel very close to the road. I mean, that doesn't really present a problem to me. I think if my house were that close to the road and it was a cycle track outside, it wouldn't bother me if there's already cars there. But that's, me. So I guess my going to my question for Jake is there some way we consider that? Because if not, I really feel like it should be considered for an SUP. Some way to consider a cycle track in the future, or whether a lane of car traffic could be used for bicycles in some way.
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. Commissioner Payton, I don't really have a really good answer for you in that regard. Dave may be able to speak to it, but I mean, when we go to design of that project, to me is when we determine what the appropriate facility might be for there, and if a cycle track is what that would be. I can speak a little bit more to the shared use path, and Michael alluded to that house, and you did too, that was really close. I believe it's on 22nd Terrace. And when we brought that to the City Commission, we brought dimensions to them, showing them that if we were to put in a 10-foot shared use path here, that those folks would not be able to use their driveway any longer. and that was a major sticking point.
Yeah, that's right. That's the house that it's the driveway is the issue. There's another house that's very close, but the driveway is not on Naismith. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just my concern, is that I see that if that's a 5-foot sidewalk, it's also going to be used for sidewalk or for bicycles. And so I think that's pretty important to consider, and we should put off doing that for next year and consider it more, what we want to do with it.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I had a kind of a technical question here, and I really hope I'm not treading over old ground because I know this has probably been talked about before, but could anybody remind me on staff or on commission how the West 21st Street from Tennessee Street to Louisiana Street sidewalks came to be on the 2021 plan? The reason I ask is it's $105,000 for design and construction, but when you look at the rankings, it's a 7. And there's a lot of 9s and 10s that are about the same cost that are later on the CIP. And even when you compare cost per linear foot, it's still comparable. It's not like it's in the very lowest quartile. So is there some need that's fulfilling? Because it doesn't score very highly, nor is it the cheapest project. So how did we get here, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. Commissioner Kuzmyak, I know it scored much higher on last year's scoring. With made changes, that's what dropped it down to a 7.
Okay.
So originally we had envisioned building that this year, but we needed funds for our TA projects, and so we're going to bump that. So that's why it's remaining on the list, because we received the recommendation to push it to 2021. Okay, thanks. So in that case, I pose a question to my fellow commissioners. So we used to have, Lauren, this is more for your education here because you weren't here yet, obviously. We used to have a different prioritization matrix and criteria, and we tweaked it a little bit last year in response to staff suggestions, commissioner suggestions, and public suggestions. I forget what the exact tweaks were. I think some of the things were maybe weighted more heavily to what's nearest school. But that did change the ranking of a couple of projects. So that's what Jake is describing, that this particular project that is currently slated for soon used to rank a lot higher in the list, but now that the scores have been adjusted, it no longer ranks particularly highly. Therefore, my question to the commission is, do we think that our tweaks to the rankings were good last year? If so, it seems like maybe we should select a different project at this point, because otherwise, what was the purpose of redoing those rankings, if not to select more appropriate projects to get done sooner? Shall I propose an alternate project? There's a lot of projects and they all have numbers and the streets are numbered. It's kind of confusing, but let's say, for example, P062, Maple Lane from East 21st Terrace to south of Clear Road. I gotta be honest, not very familiar with this part of town, but I did look it up and there's not a whole lot of sidewalks in the neighborhood. It's on the kind of east central part of town, sort of Brook Creek-ish. That's $50,000. Then there's P051, which is Ridge Court. That's only $30,000. Both of these are design and construction. They both rank higher than West 21st Street. Should we get 2 more applicable projects for the price of 1 less applicable project now that we have a better ranking system? Charlie.
Commissioner Bryan, I'm just wondering if this makes sense with the 21st Street Bike Boulevard. It might be that it was considered part of the improvements to 21st Street.
I mean, it certainly ties into it, right? I mean, it goes to Louisiana's sort of, the terminus, basically.
I mean, that's maybe a question for staff. Like, how does this fit in with the project to improve 21st Street? Is it the same year?
Well, the bicycle boulevard project's going forward right now, so it certainly ties in. I mean, it's on 21st Street. It's in the same corridor, so there's that benefit. So that's something it's hard to score that, I guess, but didn't show up in the scoring. But So yeah, and it's really, it was a carryover from last year. It was on last year's plan to do, and it kind of fit the overall, how much funds we had left for 2021. And, you do have the benefit of the tying into the Bike Boulevard project. So those are benefits for keeping it in 21, but you all could give us other direction on moving other projects up if you feel those are more important.
Aaron,
Commissioner, go ahead, Aaron.
I'd like to see that remain in 2021.
Would you be willing to share your reasons?
Because I think it coincides well with the Bike Boulevard, and I think that kind of it completes the street, I feel like.
Thank you. Charlie?
Commissioner Bryan, I was just going to say, I think 2021, as proposed, I'm pretty content with it. I think we need to do a lot more discussion, even if we just take this year by year. 2022, I think if you want to schedule maybe more time at a future meeting where we could drill into these year by year, maybe that would be more productive for us. But as it stands right now, of the 5 years, I feel like we need to just give a thumbs up to 2021. 2021, and if there's going to be any more discussion, I guess I'd like to see it happen at another date. I'd like to spend more time on the 2022 bike projects, even the 2023, 24, 25 bike projects. I'm not sure that we should prioritize the 6th Street shared use path over the Lawrence Loop, for example. I think that's pretty high in the score, but I don't think it's as critical a need given that there's already a sidewalk there. So I think the Lawrence Loop project is a higher priority to the community, and it would create a path that doesn't exist in any way right now in some of those segments. So it would seem more appropriate to me to make sure the Lawrence Loop is funded with or without grants, which it looks like we're basically saying we're going to fund the expansion of the 6th Street sidewalk to a shared use path with or without grants, the way this is currently proposed. But I think to do us justice, we ought to schedule time for that discussion, maybe at a study session. I don't know how we want to do it, but for tonight, it feels like 2021 is good. And the rest of this, we'll revisit this every year. So however you want to go about it, I'd like to have more discussion on 2022 another time. That's all I got.
John?
I would agree with John Ziegelmeyer, Vice Chair. I would agree with Charlie. I think 2021, let's put it to bed and move on, but then really scrutinize the years going forward. Let's spend some time, maybe even earlier in the year, as they're talking about grants and things like that. But I'm satisfied with 2021 right now.
Steve?
Steve Evans, one quick comment. I think Aaron made a really excellent point about bicycles using a 5-foot sidewalk on the east side of Naismith. And I would request that staff in the design process consider 6 feet, 7 feet, 6 feet, 2 inches. I know 5 feet is a nice round number, but I am certain that there are going to be bikes and peds on that. I'm comfortable with that, but I think if we can't get to 10, maybe we can get a little more than 5. So that would be my request during this process. Other than that, I think 2021 looks good.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. 2 process things. So the first one is that, yes, I think at this point we are ready for a motion on 2021. Hold that motion if you're going to do it, because the second process thing is this agenda item is actually for the whole 2021 to 2025 thing. So, Charlie, I'm not entirely sure. Do you mean you want to discuss this at a later time? Are we kind of running out of steam here? Because that is what this agenda item is for. So if you think that we need to separate it, I'm okay with that. But that is technically what's on the agenda. So I mean, I'm
Commissioner
okay
Bryan,
with forward.
As I recollect, we've had this CIP in front of us a few times. It doesn't go away. Committing tonight to saying approve as is doesn't prevent us from revising 2022 in the future. So what I'm simply saying is, knowing that we see this CIP, the 5-year plan, on an ongoing basis, we should be able to schedule in a more systematic way discussion about each year. We could, maybe schedule 2022 for the next meeting, so we could really drill into that. I think when we have the information in front of us that we didn't have 6 months ago, I would implore all of you to take a walk down that sidewalk on the east side of Iowa Street and discover when, just think through how a pedestrian might traverse that path and when they would come to the realization that the sidewalk ends, and whether or not they would turn around, go back up to a controlled intersection, which is at Harvard, and cross. They won't. They'll probably try to risk their life going across Iowa. So I think we have more information than we had before, and we should probably schedule time to have that discussion. We can approve tonight, but it doesn't mean we're not able to go back to this in the future. In fact, we're going to see a 2022, 2020, whatever the 5-year span would be. We'll see that again in our agenda, I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you for your explanation. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Yeah, I think in terms of really time-wise, I am okay with deferring the rest of this discussion until later and basically say, not only are we approving 2021, but we're kind of tacitly approving through 2025 at this point anyway, knowing that we can't change it. So with that, I would entertain a motion. I think we're at that point, unless there's any more discussion.
Well, Aaron Payton, Commissioner, let me clarify. I mean, it's a 5-year plan, but we look at this 5-year plan every year, correct, Dave?
Sometimes
Correct.
multiple times a year.
Correct. Yeah, our goal is to kind of take it in coordination with the city's 5-year CIP plan. And so, yeah, we'll revisit this again next spring for 22 to 26.
Great. So Aaron Payton, Commissioner, I mean, I think it's okay to just approve it unless we have specific things we want to address now, but it's a discussion. I also have a question. I've already voted on this for Planning Commission. And I guess that's fine. I agree with what Steve said about the 6 feet on Naismith or wider, as wide as we can make it, because I think we will have bikes and pedestrians both on that sidewalk, whether we say that's what it's for or not. So I think that's it.
Carol?
I think you made a good point on equity issues, but it's too late for this cycle. I think we should put it on the agenda for discussion of 2022. And I don't know that we need to wait till spring, do we?
I think we could do it honestly at the next meeting, or pretty soon, because the sooner we have these, or I guess the closer we have these discussions together, the less time we have to spend spinning our wheels and relearning it. Because for me, this is a complicated issue. I mean, there are so many P codes and B codes, and it's a lot. I mean, I spent like 3 or 4 hours last night going over all this stuff, so it's not simple. And I think if we can keep it fresh in our mind and schedule this for next time, that may be useful. So.
We also never talked about the survey that's at the end of this report, lengthy report. And I wanted to point out some things that weren't necessarily majority opinions, but there are some that I think we need to start thinking about. There were people who were talking about being more practical in the future when choosing projects. And I assume that's a project in general and how the projects are completed. There were people who were concerned about equity. And if you think about it, say you lived on the east side of town and you've been paying property taxes ever since you first moved there in 1951, but you've never, ever experienced a benefit from the property taxes you've paid because it was always going for something further west. Growth doesn't pay for itself. And so now we're getting caught up in a bind. And that does become an equity issue because we're always building new and we're not maintaining the old. One person made the comment, maybe more than one, and these are my loose translations. Building more of the loop increases need for more maintenance. So when we do that, we're creating more cost. And I don't really have a issue with the loop either way, but we need to be aware of these things when we do them. And then one of my favorite topics is the mixed message that we have for sidewalks. There was a cyclist who acknowledged the existence of pedestrians and that some sidewalks were just not rideable. And then there was another one who wanted sidewalks cleared of toys, tricycles, and parked cars so that the sidewalk would be rideable. And there was another one who said the ADA ramps were put in wrong. And we are the ones who are mixing the message. If we can't get our message straight, how can the population get it straight? Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to address this. In my neighborhood, we have potholes that my grandson can't use his skateboard because it's more of a rumble strip than a street. He has to carry it. And since we live in the lower part of town, and our street drains actually are made to funnel the water down to the Wakarusa. But we don't have the curbs to do it, so our yards get flooded instead. Our whole flooding system is bad, and it's been that way since about, I'd say 1985. And we are a newer neighborhood. The east side must be having a lot more trouble than that. And that's where the equity issue starts to come in. If we constantly neglect the old and go for the new, we create more cost, and we're not taking care of what we have. Anyway, I wanted to throw in the review of the survey.
Hey, Carol. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. I should have indicated that as well, because that did take a while to read. And I'd like to reiterate what I did see in the comments were a surprising amount of people talking about maintenance of existing bike lanes and sidewalks. I think the conversation came up last time that a lot of the stuff is so new that it doesn't really need to be fixed yet. It's pretty nice and shiny. That was not the sentiment of a couple of the people in the comments section. Apparently, a lot of people think that bike lanes are not doing great. They need to be restriped. They need to be repainted, potholes fixed, gutters fixed, stuff like that. So, so there is a call out there for maybe funneling some of this funds to maintenance. I don't think that's a discussion for this time. I think that goes to what Charlie was saying. I think we need to look more closely at 2022 to 2025 because, as Jake put it in the agenda item, it doesn't really make sense to do it until 2022 anyway, because we need this extra contingency in this particular year's budget. Well, we can talk about it for next year, maybe at the next meeting that we have. So I just like to kind of keep in mind about the maintenance, because I think, Carol, what you were saying, we have to be able to maintain what we build instead of just build it and then hand it off to Parks and Rec.
Are you ready for
something else?
Are you ready for a motion?
Yeah.
I move that we approve this budget, but that we bring it back to discuss the next year very soon.
Any second?
So when you say budget, do you mean you approve the CIP, 21 to 25 CIP? And then we can discuss it further later in the year?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go down the list of how you guys appear on my screen. Nick Kuzmyak? Aye. Carol? John?
Yes.
Donna? Steve?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes unanimously. Wait, is Catherine here? Just in case. No. Okay. In that case, the motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. I think that was a useful discussion. So, sounds good. We're at 7:30. Would anybody advocate for a break, or do we want to push through to agenda number 2? All good? Okay. This should be relatively quick. I think it was last year as well. Number 2 is consider approving the 2022 to 2023 Transportation Alternatives Project Concept applications. So, I don't know whose item this is, but feel free to take it away.
Good evening again, Commission. Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer, MSO. So KDOT has issued another call for projects for the 2022 to 2023 Transportation Alternative Program, or the TA program. They're doing things just slightly differently this year, where they're asking for concept applications, and those are going to be due at the end of this month. Essentially what they're doing is they're allowing themselves more of a chance to offer feedback to communities and kind of weed out some of the projects that aren't going to be eligible anyways. So essentially they'll be saving themselves some efficiency as well as the local community's times from proposing projects that aren't going to be eligible. There's going to be $14 million in funding available for the entire program. This is going to be a typical like past years where the grants are for 20%, the grants are for 80% of the cost of construction, and the city would be responsible for that 20% match of construction as well as design and any right-of-way costs. So again, it's a typical KDOT TA grant that we've applied for in the past. Staff is going to recommend 3 applications, or 3 concept applications, I should say, in no particular order: the Lawrence Loop from Michigan Street to Sandra Shaw, a Safe Routes to School Phase 2 project, and the 6th Street Shared Use Path project. And lastly, if Commission agrees with these projects, staff would just like to ask for what order of application priority you would recommend. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Nick Kuzmyak, Chair, MMTC. I had a quick technical question on funding. Under the fiscal impact on the agenda item, it is indicated that if the Lawrence Loop project is awarded, then $150,000 in the 2021 CIP project will be used to fund that design. So I'm okay with that. Then it said that additional funding would be needed to identify and how to acquire the right of way. For this project, a couple lines up, it says that might be up to $700,000 in right of way acquisition costs. I don't think that we'll have a problem eventually getting that amount of money, but since we don't have that necessarily built into the bike bed funding plan yet, I guess my question is, how long could a design sit while not incurring a whole lot of extra holding costs while we kind of reconfigure the projects to get that $700,000 to acquire the right of way?
Anything I would be doing would be hazarding a guess. Again, this is Jake Baldwin, MSO Project Engineer. We've got 2 properties to go through with this. Oh, I'm sorry. There's more on this. These properties aren't developed that we'd be going through for the most part. So I would want to say that not a lot on the design would change, and that it could sit on this shelf for 3 to 5 years.
Okay. That's great news. That's kind of what I was hoping, because when I was looking at it, I thought this is just the woods, basically. It's pretty undeveloped out there. So, okay, that's good to know. Does anybody else on the commission have any kind of clarification questions before we turn it over to public comment? Carol.
The shared use path on 6th Street goes from where to where?
There are 4 projects on the 6th Street shared use path. They begin, there's a small section just to the east side of Iowa Street that connects, I believe, to, it's slipping my mind, just a few blocks.
I think it's Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I believe we go to Monterey Way on the east. I would have to double check that and look at the project maps.
No, that's correct.
Carol Bowen, remembered my name this time. My next question, Jake, is 6th Street is horrible for pedestrians. And between Iowa and Mass Street, there's absolutely no way to cross the street. So, except for the tunnel.
And Casey's.
This new path that's going in, will those pedestrians be able to cross their street? Will they be able to cross 6th Street?
Well, they would be able to cross 6th Street. Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. They would be able to cross 6th Street at Wisconsin, where the new light is at Casey's.
That's it? Just one place? These are pedestrians.
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. I think if we went on with some of those other 3 projects there to the west side of Iowa, we would be looking at crossing improvements as well as part of those projects.
And what about east on 6th Street? Will that happen too at some point? Just not jaywalking there. Go ahead.
Future pedestrian projects on 6th Street east of Iowa, I'm not aware of any unless the shared use path we're talking about here. Yeah, there are very few crossing places. Wisconsin, the Pinckney Tunnel landed at Kentucky Street, I believe, before you get to Massachusetts.
Yeah, this is Dave Cronin, the engineer. I think our future bikeway plan, we identified 5th Street as a potential bike boulevard to pick up this shared use path at Wisconsin. So you would at 6th and Wisconsin go to the north to 5th Street, and that would be the bicycle network. So the shared use path does serve pedestrians and bicycles, but for this grant application, it's a bicycle facility, and so that's the plan, I think, on the bike plan.
So in the future, are there any plans to improve 6th Street?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. There's no plans to reconstruct 6th Street in the near future. There are sidewalks on both sides of 6th Street, I believe, east of Wisconsin. But there's no current plans to do any other projects. Other than maintenance projects, we've been trying to get some money from KDOT to mill and overlay the street because it's deteriorating. But other than that, no major reconstruction projects.
Okay. If there are no further questions, do we have any members of the public who are signed up to give a comment?
We do not. Dave Cronin, the engineer, and there's no one here to speak.
Okay. In that case, let's bring it back to the commission.
This is Steve Evans, Commissioner. Jake, did you say you wanted us to prioritize these 1, 2, 3? Did I hear you correctly?
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. Yes, Commissioner Evans. In the past, KDOT has asked us to submit a priority with our applications.
Well, I would just off the top of my head here, my prioritization would be safe routes 1, 6th Street shared use path 2, and Lawrence Loop 3. Keeping in mind they're all on the list and they're all kind of ones.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Yeah, Steve, I don't think we can really go wrong here because these are all really good projects. And I got to be honest, I don't think any of them really are particularly controversial. A lot of people really like the Lawrence Loop. Who's going to argue against safe routes to school unless you're a monster, right? And then the 6th Street shared use path, anybody who's been along 6th Street knows it's kind of rough. So it's kind of hard to argue with any of these. Jake, could you remind us on how much the rankings tend to matter to KDOT? Because I think in the past it's been kind of a coin toss, right?
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. Yes, I know we've been awarded projects that we have not prioritized highly in the past.
Do you think they might be changing things now that we're going to
answer.
conceptual instead of, I guess, whatever the previous application was like?
They didn't offer any feedback to that regard. The only other thing I would mention is we did receive feedback on the 6th Street shared use path, our last round of applications, that because of the existing facility there, it didn't score as high as it had previously.
I see. Thanks.
Dave Cronin, the engineer. I just want to add one thing just to clarify this concept application. We'll be getting that feedback back before we make the formal application. So as we used to get the feedback after. Now they're going to give you feedback before, just for an example, if you don't have the right of way to build a shared use path, they will say, hey, what's your plan for acquiring the right of way, or what's your plan for crossing the railroad, or other obstacles they'll give feedback to. So I think a lot of the things we kind of understand are some of our obstacles, but I know other communities and smaller communities maybe have other challenges that don't do these projects, these TA projects often. So it's more of an effort to get feedback before the official application. So we will get that before we submit, and we can provide that information to you before we officially submit the application.
Charlie?
Commissioner Bryan, I was just going to try to get us back on track here. We're being asked to support the staff recommendation, and I think the prioritization that's listed with the Lawrence Loop as number 1, Safe Routes as number 2, and the 6th Street number 3 makes the most sense. KDOT didn't award the 6th Street project in the past because there's already a sidewalk there. I think, the fact is there's already a sidewalk there. The Lawrence Loop, there's no path there that people could use. So I think that's a higher priority because it increases access. I guess I'm not sure if the state didn't give us any other feedback why we would prioritize the 6th Street shared use path, unless they indicated somehow that stands a better chance this time around. That's all I got.
Thanks. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC. I think we're getting close to a motion, but I want to make sure we hear other comments in case there are any additional. Seeing none, who's up for making a motion? And guessing at a ranking. That will be most amenable to the most of us. Yep.
Commissioner Bryan, I move we approve the 2022-2023 Transportation Alternatives Project Concept application with the ranking as Lawrence Loop number 1, Safe Routes to School Phase 2 number 2, and 6th Street Shared Use Path is number 3.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Payton, second.
Thank you. All right, Nick Kuzmyak, Chair, MMTC. Going to go down the list again. For myself, aye. Commissioner Bowen. Was that a yes? Okay. Commissioner Ziegelmeier.
Yes.
Commissioner Holteen.
Yes.
Commissioner Evans.
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Payton.
Yes.
And Commissioner Bryan.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. Sounds good to me, and I guess we would be seeing this again before November, right?
Yep.
Sounds good. That was pretty quick. Was that 5-10 minutes? Checking in again, if anybody would like a break, no judgment here, before we go into the final agenda item. I don't know how long it's going to be, honestly.
I'd prefer to take a 5-minute break if no one else is bold enough.
Thank you for being bold, because I agree. Let's do it.
Okay.
Shall we come back at 7:43 is kind of a weird time. Can we keep track of that well enough to come back at 7:43?
We can.
I see enough nods. All right. We are recessed for a few minutes then. So I think we can get started. Once again, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. We are on agenda item number 3, receive update on the traffic signal coordination and timing study.
Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. This is the first time I've been in on a commission meeting, so I'm generally a sewer guy. I might lean on Dustin a little bit to correct me on some technical aspects, but I've been managing the traffic signal coordination and timing study. There's basically 2 main goals of this project. The first is to improve coordination of the traffic signals and on 6th Street, Iowa, and 23rd Street. And then the second part is to look at capital improvements and equipment upgrades that could get us even better coordinated. So basically, let's do the best with the equipment we have at all those lights now, and then prioritize a list of traffic signal improvements for the long term to work into our CIP. So Olson Engineering was selected for the consulting to help us with that. And they did traffic counts in December of this year. And our plan was to first implement 6th Street and then follow with Iowa Street and then 23rd Street in the fall. COVID-19 kind of, and the lockdowns kind of threw a wrench in our plans. We were hoping to do our pre-drive plan or pre-implementation drive times the week after spring break, implement in April, and then do our post-drive times in May. So everything kind of shut down right there in spring break. At first, we just kind of delayed implementation, and then we kind of ran into, well, how long is this going to go? Let's just implement 6th Street now. So we won't have pre versus post drive times for 6th Street. But I'm going to start. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to hit a couple high points of this memo that Olson put together, and we'll go from there. So here's the 3 corridors that we're really focused on. 6th Street from downtown all the way to K10, Iowa Street from 6th Street to K10, and 23rd, which is showing from O'Connell to Wakarusa because there's no stoplights east or west of there. On 6th Street, generally you can see in a lot of places the westbound traffic has a much higher peak in the afternoon. This one's not much different for the morning. There's other places where the eastbound traffic has a slightly higher volume of traffic in the morning, and then westbound's a little higher in the afternoon. So like on this graph, green is the number of cars traveling westbound each hour, and this orange one here is eastbound each hour. On 6th Street, these 2 are Castle north and southbound. This right here is what the traffic signals were programmed to do before we started. So the free basically means the traffic signals aren't really working in coordination. They're just when someone pulls up on the side street, they give them the green light. And so that's, in my experience in the past, 6th Street would be very choppy. You know, you get the hard red at Ridgeview, you keep driving west, and you get a hard red at Schwartz right after that. And then, you know, sometimes it feels like then you get the hard red at Lawrence Avenue. And then there was a few lights and flash where it'd go and flash overnight, but most of them stayed in free overnight. The big outlier there is 6th Street, Kentucky, Vermont, and Tennessee, or Kentucky, Vermont, and Massachusetts. Those lights don't have detection, and they just ran in a hard 120-second cycle, the same cycle throughout the whole day, and then went and flashed at night. We decided to not use flash at any of the signals at all. A lot of that is it improves pedestrian safety. You know, if you come up to a signal at 1 a.m. and it's in flash, it's never, and you push the button, it's never going to stop traffic to let you cross. So even though it's probably light traffic, putting that signal in flash overnight, it can make it harder to cross for pedestrians. So this was our first proposed plan, which is pretty close to what we did. It has a 120-second cycle in the morning from 6:45 to 9 in the morning. That's a little prioritized for eastbound traffic. A shorter 100-second cycle over the midday, which is balanced, and then a 120-second cycle in the PM rush hour that's more prioritized for westbound. That we implemented that, the second week of May, and tweaked it a little bit. They're supposed to come back in August when the students come back, hopefully, and traffic's back to near normal or close to normal, and do post times and then see if there's any underlying issues. We did have a problem with, as implemented, with these 3 lights there at the bridge. The original plan was prioritizing westbound traffic, or east and westbound traffic. The problem was cars coming over the bridge heading southbound, if there's any, and turning east on 6th Street, if there's any heavy traffic, they backed up into Vermont. So we kind of had to switch that around during the times of heavy traffic. So when you came off the bridge here, you automatically got this green light at Mass because there's such little storage there. So here's the plan that we went with, where we have a 120-second plan in the morning, which prioritizes traffic coming over the bridge and distributing that. You get higher traffic in the morning coming coming southbound over the bridge, and then all throughout the day, we have a 120-second cycle that prioritizes eastbound traffic turning north over the bridge. Originally, we had a 100-second cycle for parts of that, and it was way too choppy. Like, people were running the yellow lights to get through. It was just too short, and we did away with that, except overnight, where we had the shorter cycle there, because we don't want people waiting as long when there's hardly any traffic overnight. So generally where we are on that is here in July, they will be proposing new timing plans for Iowa, Clinton Parkway, and 23rd Street. We'll be implementing that in the fall, and then also going back and tweaking 6th Street. One thing I should mention is all these retiming plans incorporated different guidelines for pedestrian speeds. So, Dustin, correct me if I'm wrong. Previously, you assumed a pedestrian traveled across the intersection at 4 feet per second, and that was lowered to 3 to give pedestrians a little more time to cross. However, when a pedestrian does push a button, that really kind of throws off the coordination plan in certain areas. Then once all that's done, they'll provide a list of capital improvements and equipment improvements at each intersection. Hopefully we'll prioritize that of what could most improve traffic flow. And then for at least Iowa Street and 23rd Street, we'll be able to show how much our improvements save time, gas, and CO2 emissions just from getting those lights better coordinated. With that, unless Dustin needs to correct anything I said, I guess I would throw it open to questions from the commissioners.
All right, thanks.
No, I didn't.
Kuzmyak, Chair. And sorry.
This is Dustin with MSO. I didn't have anything to add. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, sorry. Okay, does anybody in the commission have any questions for Nick, the other one? If not, I had a quick question.
I do.
Oops. Sorry, Steve, go first.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm all for keeping automobiles moving efficiently. I'm also wondering how you factor in the timing for pedestrian crossings. Is that, do you look at that at an individual intersection in terms of after the button is pushed? Does everybody get so much time, or is it evaluated in each location?
It's evaluated at each location, mainly dependent on how wide the intersection is. So if you're crossing 6th Street at Wakarusa, where there's like a right turn lane, double left turn lanes, the whole intersection is much wider than if you're crossing 6th Street at, let's say, Main. So based on the width of the intersection you're actually crossing, the light will give you more time. So if you're crossing Lawrence Avenue, if you're on 6 crossing Lawrence Avenue, the button, let's say, may give you 12 seconds to cross. If you're crossing 6th Street at Lawrence Avenue, it might give you 20. And if you're crossing 6th Street at Wakarusa, it might be 30. Did that?
Okay. Yeah, that's real helpful.
Wrong. I'm just kind of going with that.
Yeah. I also wonder if you're crossing in a wheelchair, or if you're crossing, a disabled person who's going to be moving slowly, is there, how does that factor in? Do you take the longest case for someone who may be in that condition, or do you take an average and everybody lives with it?
Yeah, Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. I think it's fair to say you take the worst case scenario, and I think that was mainly would be covered by the guidelines lowering it from 4 feet per second to 3 feet per second. So, I mean, there's not like a separate button to push for a slower person, but by lowering that assumed speed for crossers for everyone, that gives a longer amount of time for everyone whenever the pedestrian button is pushed. I would add that all 3 lights at Kentucky, Vermont, and Mass don't have pedestrian buttons, except for when you're at City Hall going southbound. So like all those lights assume there's a pedestrian crossing every cycle because there's no button. So like that limits, not having those buttons there limits the amount of time that westbound or eastbound traffic can make the double left turn across the bridge, because that light's giving time for the pedestrian to cross from City Hall going west every cycle, even if the pedestrian's not there.
Thank you. That's all I've got, Nick.
Arrow, did you have something as well?
Yes, my question is up front in the executive summary. I could not find the strategic plan on the city's website, and I sure would like to find that. But the first success factor was safe, healthy, and welcoming neighborhoods, and I'm wondering how that applied. I'm fond with innovative infrastructure, core services, and sound physical stewardship, but the neighborhoods?
Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. To me, as a longtime Lawrence resident, if 6th Street is flowing well and people are moving across the city quickly on 6th Street, then they aren't cutting through the neighborhoods. And I mean, to me, that's a major problem. I don't know, problem. I mean, people cut through the neighborhoods, and then when they do that, they're traveling at 6th Street speeds instead of residential speeds. So it's like if we can keep 6th Street moving happily and get people from one side of the town on the arterials, it's a better situation on the neighborhood streets. In my opinion, that's why that's categories added. Let's see. Do you want me to look at and try and find where the strategic plan is? Because there's 7. Is it 7? Whatever. Critical success factors. Is there another question?
Looks like Charlie.
No, that was a good explanation.
Commissioner Bryan, I just wanted to ask if in the work that Olson did they collect data on pedestrian crossings, such as like the number of pedestrians crossing at the signalized intersections or other intersections?
They did. Unfortunately, those counts were done in December.
Oh.
So there's some extrapolation there of how many pedestrians are out on a beautiful spring day in April compared to how many are walking around in December.
Got it. If they were able to do this, I wasn't sure I understood. Are they going to do this again after KU students come back?
Sorry, Nick Hoyt, engineering program. 6th Street's generally implemented. We're gonna do the pre-drive times on Iowa and 23rd after the students come back, and then we will tweak 6th Street and just make sure, drive it several times and just make sure that, because everything's kind of based on a model. So there's a model time based on the posted speed, and then there's reality. So it's like, if you're hitting this green light, you get the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move this one up 1 second or whatever, that sort of thing. But it won't be all redone.
Okay. Commissioner Bryan, I think that if there's any incidental data that can be shared with the MMTC about pedestrian usage of these major thoroughfares, that would be could be helpful to us. I know there's always, this issue about pedestrians trying to cross these major roads. Just earlier, we talked about pedestrians crossing on Iowa, for example, and the potential need for that additional sidewalk being built. So if that road is going to be examined, if I was going to be examined and there's any data that comes out of that that could be useful to us, I'd appreciate it if it could be shared with us somehow.
Nick Hoyt, engineering program manager. Yes, we can. I believe we'd be able to share the pedestrian data. However, it's not going to show, the equipment was installed at the intersection and just certain intersections. So it's not going to show who, as you were talking earlier, comes southbound on Iowa and kind of gets to the dead end sidewalk and then goes rogue and crosses the highway there. It would show who
at Harvard,
at the signalized intersection at Iowa, at 15th and Iowa.
I think that's also helpful though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from the commission? And did we have anybody sign up to public to speak on this issue from the public?
No.
Okay. In that case, let me check on what our action's supposed to be here. It is just receive it.
Yeah, just receive it.
Okay. Any further discussion before I close this one out?
I would just say there will be more updates on this as the project progresses.
Okay. Thank you very much for your explanation and rundown of that. It's exciting to see something happening there. Oh, Charlie.
So I don't know if this is at all possible, but I'm impressed by the figure 7 that shows the peak hour volumes. And it does contain a lot of data. I don't know if Olson put this together, but if there was any way to maybe colorize this or use any other kind of graphic manipulation to make it easier to interpret without having to read through all of the line level detail. The MPO puts together some charts that show like pie charts. I think I've seen other ways of visualizing traffic count data. And while this is impressive, I don't know if there's another way to do it, but it would be nice to show kind of a heat map version of this that would indicate kind of like where, how these all are relative to each other. Like, does 6th and Congressional get as much action as 6th and Wakarusa? Clearly it doesn't. But if there's a way to show that with a heat map kind of approach, that would be really cool. So I don't know if you can pass it on to Olson. There's a lot of data in this though, so I think it's useful.
Right. So, Dustin, are these numbers? It's like, or Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. Dustin, do you know like this 122, 160, and 302? Mm-hmm. Where does it say like what those are? Is that I think one's like a peak hour and one's
the first number is the AM peak volume, and then the midday, and then the PM.
Okay. I guess to answer your question, Commissioner Bryan, is we will work on a easier way to absorb this information. I would throw out to the general group, has anybody driven 6th Street lately? Does anyone know better?
I think so. But there's less traffic, I think. So.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's kind of hard to tell, honestly. Pretty empty right now. Well, empty-ish.
Yeah. Or Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. The one thing I definitely, my 2 cents on it is it seems that the hard red, you're getting less hard red lights. A lot of times you're getting to the light as it's at the end of a cycle. Maybe you're slowing down a little bit and that light turns green instead of like several hard reds in a row. There are people in Lawrence that think that coordination project should now be no red lights for anyone in either direction. And that is not possible, I guess. I think it's better, but
I've driven that, I don't know, a handful of times, and from Monterey to Mass, and each time it's been like mid-morning, and I've made it from Monterey to Kentucky, and sometimes to Vermont. And I've seen some backups on Mass, from Mass back to west of Vermont. But generally, up to that point in time, it's been really, really working well.
Yeah, and we just, our Nick Hoyt, Engineering Program Manager. It was about June 15th. We kind of re-switched around the Mass bridge lights just a couple weeks ago. So I guess that's all I have. So thank you.
Yep. Thanks. With that, we're moving on to, 1 second here, staff items. So.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, City Engineer. I'll start with the first one here. We're having a public meeting to review the Lawrence Loop design plans July 15th from 4:30 to 6 at the East Lawrence Rec Center. pending social distancing guidelines at the time. So things are subject to change, but we are trying to keep that moving forward to meet our letting deadline of this fall. So we will try to find a way to engage the public some more on that as we continue on the design. Any questions on that item? If not, we'll move on to number 2, and I'll let Jake kind of give everyone an update on the sidewalk improvement program.
Sure. Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer with MSO. City Commission supported the staff advertising our 2020 Sidewalk Improvement Program at their June meeting. They also directed staff to work with the Multi-modal Transportation Commission to produce priority pedestrian routes to be used for mitigation in next year's evolution of the program. So in previous years, we looked at zones of the town, we're going to move more towards priority routes. And so with that in mind, the MSO asset management team, in conjunction with our transportation planners, are going to work together to bring a model to the commission in October that's going to prioritize routes based on previously identified community values that we developed as part of the framework of our non-motorized policy. So you'll see a similar scoring matrix that's going to, we're going to input X, Y, and Z, and it's going to spit out routes A, B, and C. And that's going to be kind of based on some of the inputs that we've gathered from our non-motorized policy previously. And with that, again, they want to bring that to you in October for discussion and feedback. But I'd be happy to take any questions you might have on that or the program in general.
I'm going to offer one quick comment that this is kind of a big deal in the community. It doesn't really need to be said, but I think we should consider how we do this. I hate to limit it to a 1-hour study session or an agenda item. And I really think this may deserve an extended study session or maybe an agenda where there isn't much, if anything else, on it. We're really going to need to try very hard to get our arms around this and send something to the commission that's very thoughtful and thorough.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Steve, I agree, and it sounds to me that this may be appropriate for a committee who can kind of spend some time outside of city or outside of MMTC hours and kind of dig into the weeds a little bit, and then come back with recommendations for us. Is that kind of what you had in mind?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. That would be okay. Yeah.
Okay, Charlie.
Commissioner Bryan, I just wanted to get some clarification. The staff update is that they're going to look at the priority pedestrian routes. And that seems pretty straightforward to me. So I'm just trying to get clear on what else is it that we're being asked to do, other than instead of using the quadrants or the sectors, to just use the priority network, which we're actually already using for our head bike prioritization policy. It feels like this just makes it consistent with our own policy. Is there more you're asking of us?
No, you're correct, Commissioner. Jake Baldwin, MSO Engineer.
Hey, Jake, you're muted.
Pardon me. Jake Baldwin, MSO Engineer. The asset management team and the transportation planners are going to work together to put together this model in GIS that takes into account the inputs that some of the inputs that were put together as part of the non-motorized plan. So when they bring this model to you in October, it'll be to get feedback on, yes, we like what the model does and the inputs to it, or no, we want to change it.
So my thought on this is I'd really appreciate the alignment with, our our policy around funding priorities around sidewalk gaps, because it seems like now we're possibly looking at putting maintenance of sidewalks and building of new sidewalks kind of in the same space. The same route, the same priority network is going to be used for both the pedestrian projects and also for the enforcement of the sidewalk ordinance. That seems like a good thing. Notwithstanding the question about how to fund sidewalk maintenance.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I'm wondering if now is the appropriate moment to try to get out ahead of this and try to designate a couple of interested people to tackle this in a committee. In terms of the timeline, Jake or Dave, do you have any recommendation as to how soon we need to move on this, or how soon were you planning to move on this?
Jake Baldwin, MSO engineer. Again, they want to present that to you in October, and part of that is it's going to take 4 months to get LiDAR data from our vendor, and they want to be able to incorporate that data into this model.
And when do we expect to have the LiDAR data compiled?
Jake Baldwin, MSO, I'm not positive. I was told the 4-month timeline, and they told me we'd like to bring it back in October. They think that'll give them enough time to get that model produced.
Okay, but to the city commission, it's not till, is that also October?
No, there currently is not a timeline to bring that back to city commission.
Okay, thanks. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. It sounds like in that case we can maybe defer this until we have more information, and just assume that it's something on the horizon that I think we need to get to. So I guess, Dave, I'll talk with you later to try to make sure we schedule this back in for October-ish based on how the consultants get through the data. And then from there we can, if the discussion warrants it, we can maybe designate a few people to, be the new experts on this thing. So in the meantime, it sounds like not much to do until we get the data. So that's good news. Okay. Any other comments on this item? All right. Seeing none, we're going to move into commission items, it looks like. I am slated to give a PTAC update. Let's see. I was not at the last PTAC meeting, unfortunately, because we had a baby, so we were a little busy. But in the meantime, I did get the minutes. So what they discussed, is there are some planned route changes, as they do every year. There's not a ton of changes for the routes this year, but I'm blanking right now on how the engagement went for trying to get public input. I believe it may have been a Lawrence Listen survey, but there was definitely some public engagement involved to try to, figure out how we can most efficiently change routes if need be. COVID precautions, kind of an ongoing thing of how exactly we're going to make that work. And there was an update on the electric bus grant, which I think at that point had already been decided. We had been awarded the electric bus grant. So that is going forward. So that's pretty exciting. And that's basically it. Other than that, there's probably going to be a couple changes to sort of the format and discussion topics of these meetings because Adam's new. Adam Weigel, our new transit and also parking manager. So that's it for PTAC. I did have a couple of items that were commission related, or the kind of thing that could go under commission items. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to probably launch into those. All right. First one is, I'm just going to read this one off here. So as a new dad, I'm suddenly tasked with pushing a stroller on streets and sidewalks. And I knew our sidewalks weren't great, but I wasn't prepared for quite how pitifully suited they are for wheels. Beyond the conclusion that our sidewalks are rather unusable to less able-bodied neighbors, my main takeaway is that it's really important that we try to experience infrastructure from viewpoints that we're not familiar with. Obviously, it's not always possible, but we could make a pretty big difference in the design if we're able to consider other viewpoints from kind of the ground level. But, for example, I can't truly experience how, say, a poorly lit street would feel for a female pedestrians or how a jogging path could feel to people of color. But at least I can now say I have had the rather humbling experience of knowing just how much I don't know. So I don't know if any of you have come to those conclusions over the years, but man, it's so much easier being, you know, a 30-something able-bodied white man. It's pretty easy to get around, but it's good to sometimes kind of take the path less traveled and see how that could factor into our decisions, how we design stuff. So I'm guilty of driving a fair amount because, I mean, I'm lazy, right? And I got to carry a lot of stuff. So unfortunately, I don't get to bike as much as I would. But, you know, I'm a walker much more now with COVID and a baby. So I guess my call here is just to, you know, if you have some free time and if you want to explore a project beforehand, maybe consider trying to explore it in a mode of transportation that you're not very familiar with. And Steve has advocated for this quite a bit over the last year or so, and I'm just now coming around to how important that is. So there you have it. Another one was, so in the survey for the non-motorized pedestrian and bike plan stuff, there was a couple of responses related to wayfinding signage. And as somebody who's biked and walked and taken transit around other cities that I'm not from, man, it is so helpful to have wayfinding signs. I was able to get around Minneapolis on bike pretty easily with occasionally looking at my phone when I was really lost, but really just looking at signs. I've biked the full Lawrence Loop a couple times, and I've gotten super lost, and I live here. So I got to say, I think people are onto something when they say wayfinding could really help. And it's not particularly expensive. It's just small metal strips strategically placed at the right spots. So I guess I don't really know how to put this forward, but if we could consider in future Lawrence Loop projects and other maybe even safe routes to school, trying to show where the nearest destination is for maybe why this access trail exists in the first place. So for safe routes to school, it might be kind of nice to occasionally just have a sign saying like, hey, Kennedy Elementary is this way, 0.3 miles. I think with the wayfinding project, it seems that it might be more economical to do a whole lot of it at once. Just order a ton of signs instead of trying to, you know, go to the sign store each time a new project comes into place. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing that would even be eligible to be on the NMPPP list, but food for thought. I think it can make a lot of these routes a lot more accessible to idiots like me who don't know how to actually go around on their own without a map. So I can't be the only one. Steve, I was going to talk about slow streets, but I think I'd rather you bring those up. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think your wording is probably going to be better here.
Well, I'll be very brief. I think coinciding with the discussion, the public discussion and the city commission meetings about the bike boulevard on 21st Street, I can't remember if it was Charlie or Michael Allman that brought to my attention that maybe we're calling these things, we should be calling them slow streets or safe streets as opposed to bike boulevards. And along with the COVID matters, many cities much larger than Lawrence and some not so large have really started looking at the idea of safe streets that I think conceptually handle all kinds of different modes of transportation very comfortably, most certainly biking and walking and wheeling. And a lot of these have been major streets, neighborhood streets that have been designated that may or may not allow neighborhood traffic, certainly slower traffic. But I think that it's something that we ought to keep our eyes on, and I think would be a great study session topic for us. I look around town and I could probably point in just about every neighborhood where I would put a slow street or a safe street. And some of them spike to Massachusetts Street, but heck, it works in any neighborhood. I just think it was a relatively new idea. And I thank Charlie and Michael for bringing it to my attention, but it keeps popping up on my radar screen as I look through, you know, various organizations that are into mobility and movement. So.
Thanks, Steve. And I wanted
please
to
chime in. Go ahead.
Thanks. So, sorry, Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. I wanted to follow up on that because when COVID-19 first started, necessitating people don't drive to work as much and walk around on their own streets maybe, and made the need for slow streets much more apparent. A lot of cities just kind of struck while the iron was hot, as it were, and started closing down streets. Sometimes there was neighborhood engagement, sometimes there was not. And there's been a bit of a backlash since the George Floyd protests have been sweeping the nation into sometimes slow streets aren't actually good for the neighborhood that gets settled with them. And it's hard for, again, for me in my demographic, it's hard for me to imagine that would be a problem. But the more I look at it, I can see, okay, well, if people of color are more easily targeted while not in the safety of their car, which is even more than they would be targeted in the safety of their car, then it may not be great to kind of all of a sudden force them to walk and bike in places where they may not necessarily feel safe. So I guess what I'm getting at with this, and there's been a couple of articles on this, including a particularly large one in City Lab, that the main takeaway I have is if we decide where these things are going to go, the suggestion has to come from the neighborhood. I think if it doesn't, then we risk things like, like the 13th Street Bike Boulevard backlash, where there was a lot of vandalism, possibly from people who even live in the neighborhood. I don't know how to do that. I mean, a potential idea could be, say, hey, if you submit a petition to City Hall that has 50% of the people on your block in favor of a slow street, we'll certainly listen to it. Which would be a good way to get to know your neighbors, honestly. But I don't think going through neighborhood associations is particularly effective. Being the vice president of a neighborhood association, it's really hard to reach people and to get a response. But if it can be disseminated some way, possibly in an LJ World article that says, hey, if you like the idea on that street, if you're into that sort of thing, and you want to close down your street, talk to your neighbors, see if they're interested in it, and then talk to city staff and see what you can do about it. If we do a really low-cost implementation, it could be possible to do multiple streets. I mean, Mass Street is way more involved. But just putting up a couple cones here and there is probably not a ton of outlay. So I'd be curious to hear from Jake and Dave and Dustin. Any thoughts? I mean, is there any way that we can use existing communications channels to solicit nominations for safe streets or slow streets?
Yeah, I think there's ways to do that. It hasn't become one of the priorities that we've identified to solicit that. We, quite frankly, haven't had a lot of requests to do that during COVID. A couple people have kind of asked about it. I don't know. I've seen implementation, and I think NACDO put out a guideline to do under COVID slow streets and market streets and different type of streets, but we haven't had a lot of, I guess, organic public feedback on the need to do that.
Okay.
Got a lot of feedback on Mass Street, but
yeah,
but not on neighborhood streets, or the need to have more social distancing when commuting, being via bicycle or pedestrian, which was a lot of the need in some of the larger metro areas, just because more people were commuting and outside and recreating, that some of those slow streets were designated just to provide more space.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the need is the same in Lawrence as maybe some other cities. So
there's just really not that much traffic to begin with. Charlie?
Commissioner Bryan, this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier about the CIP. We have in 2022 the 13th Street Bike Boulevard, and I'm concerned about how we move forward with bike boulevards. Whether we just need to rename them, or I think more fundamentally just think differently about how we engage the neighborhood. And the neighborhood traffic management program, I think, is a good place for a neighborhood to kind of make known what its interests are. And if it has a particular area it would like to prioritize for slowing down traffic to make it safer for everyone else, then I think that could come through that program. And how they design the reconstruction of a street or reconfiguration of a street, to me, would come more organically out of that process. So I'd kind of like to kind of put on hold any of our independent efforts to try to do any bike boulevards and let it just become part of the neighborhood traffic management program. Maybe we need to rename the neighborhood traffic management program so that it's less traffic management and more neighborhood right-of-way design. I don't know how you want to call it, but it seems like it's the thing we're doing that involves community engagement at a neighborhood level, and we ought to build into that opportunities for thinking about slow streets or other right-of-way improvements that would improve the neighborhoods, and maybe speak specifically to that strategic plan critical success factor, healthy and safe neighborhoods. So.
One other thought I had, Nick, was this is Steve Evans, Commissioner. Like we did with Complete Streets, what is a slow street? What is the kit of parts? What's the toolkit? And that way we're not really prescribing, okay, this is just slow street for East Lawrence and for West Lawrence. You know, it's more of a process and an understanding of what the options are depending on the particular neighborhood desires, configuration, traffic, and walking patterns. But I think the point is get to the point where it's part of our vocabulary and something that we have and we promote once we understand it better. That's all for now.
Okay. Thanks. I did have one more update, actually. Sorry, and then I can turn it over. So most of you remember the Article 9 parking, loading, and access standards that the Planning Commission sent over to us to comment on. And then after, forming a committee, talking with staff, bringing it to everybody else on the commission, we did send it back to Planning Commission. So that was their June meeting, I want to say. So I was present for that one, and I did explain MMTC's comments on the proposed changes. The majority of commissioners were not interested at all in any sort of further discussion on transportation-related issues with respect to parking standards, which is pretty disappointing since it indicates that either they don't see the connection between land use and transportation, which is pretty undeniable, or they just don't want to take on any more scope, which is maybe more understandable. They have a huge scope. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt since the item did come up around midnight or so. But to me, it is kind of a strong signal that they seem to intend to stay in their silos and ignore the context in which land use decisions live. So I will be attempting to participate in tomorrow's City Commission meeting to try to reiterate MMTC's comments because they're not exactly the same as Planning Commission. Planning Commission generally goes for the status quo in this particular revisions. So basically, I believe that it's important to note that there is a disconnect between the Planning Commission and MMTC. And I think it's in the City Commission's best interest to have input from everybody that is sort of tangentially related to parking standards. So anyway, that's that. Does
Aaron,
anybody else? Oh, yeah, Aaron?
Yeah. I'm not sure I completely, well, I do completely agree with that mostly. I do think it was late and something that people have looked at, it's been looked at for many years. So I think I generally agree that they weren't interested in broadening the scope. But I do think there's a lot of interest in land use and transportation and how they're interact with each other. So I think that's important to think about and talk about more, which comes up a lot. So yeah, you get.
Carol, you had your hand up?
A bit of history. Back when Horizon 2020 was being written, we were in task force groups and the discussion started who was going to lead, transportation or land use. And it was decided that land use would lead. It was all downhill from there.
Interesting. I actually was curious. Lauren, it's your first meeting on this city board as far as I know. Comments, thoughts? Are you now fully aware of what you signed up for?
I'm sorry, I didn't talk more. I'm
okay.
kind of absorbing a lot and kind of waiting to offer comments before I want to understand more. But I've definitely learned a lot just from this first meeting, and looking forward to contributing more as I gain more knowledge. But great, productive conversations, I think. I think you guys are, in terms of kind of the issues you all discuss, it sounds like progress is being made, and definitely interested to continue these conversations.
Excellent. Carol, I know you always have some extra comments. So to preempt your hand raising, I figured I'd just hand it over to you.
Actually, I slipped them in when I reviewed the survey.
Nice. Okay. Very efficient. Anybody else? Donna?
Can we know about the baby?
What do you want to know?
Boy, girl, what day?
It's a boy. His name is Ward. Everything was pretty easy. He has bright red hair. We're not entirely sure how that came about. And awesome. He's a pistol.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So far, so good. I'm actually going to get my first full night of sleep because I'm in Iowa right now, so I don't have to worry about a crying baby for about 12 hours. Woohoo! So, all right, all. Well, in that case, wait, there's probably more on the agenda, isn't there? Calendar. What do we need to know about the calendar? Dave, any updates?
Yeah. The calendar's been updated. We got Transit Hub and amenities, which we're currently working on. Our MSO department's working on some plans for upgrading some amenities, so we can provide that update at the next meeting, study session, and we'll have Adam Weigel on that, hopefully to meet him. Everyone can meet him, those that haven't, our new transit and parking director. And then the neighborhood traffic management program safety campaign. We had that on the regular meeting agenda to talk about that. So I think we're still shooting for that and discussing a slogan that may tie into what we were just talking about with slow streets, and how maybe the slogan kind of steers the public campaign or awareness on slow streets. So we'll have that on the agenda. And then the Lawrence Loop plan. So pending, I guess, our other public meeting that out in the community at the East Lawrence Rec Center, we intend to bring back an update of the design plans, what we would call, I guess, field check plans for that project next month. And then I'll talk to you, Nick, about maybe other things. We may sneak in there next month. If we want to continue talking about the 5-year bike plan, we can do that, or push that into September. But those are the things that we have for next month. And then we did add that sidewalk improvement program prioritization down in October. So that's pending, again, getting that data from the LiDAR consultant. So.
Okay. Could I actually get a quick show of hands by the commissioners if we're okay with sticking in discussion over the 2022 non-motorized plan stuff in August? I'm okay with it. Anybody else? That's enough hands. Sounds good. That's 5. All right. Yeah, let's try to stick it in there with the understanding that if it goes long, September is wide open. So. All right. Anybody have any final comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. I'll second that. Let's do a show of hands to indicate our
heard a motion.
iron. Oh, what?
Did we get a motion
Donna.
from someone?
I did.
Okay, sorry.
And I seconded it. So by show of hands, aye. Okay,
Aye.
we are adjourned. So,
Yep.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next month.